Mom, that was my wedding fund, I whispered, staring at the screen where $42,000 used to be. My mother did not even blink as she sipped her coffee. Your sister needs it more, she said flatly. At least her marriage is actually worth saving. My sister smirked, and the whole table chuckled at my tears, completely unaware that my fiancé was standing right behind them. Julian stepped forward, tossed a thick manila envelope onto the center of the dining table, and smiled a cold, terrifying smile. Then none of you deserve to come to our wedding, he said. And what he pulled out of that envelope next did not just cancel a party, it destroyed their entire lives. My name is Maya. I am 28 years old, a corporate finance manager, and for my entire life I was the designated doormat of my family. I was the one who shrank so my older sister Ashley could shine. Ashley was the golden child, the influencer, with the perfect hair, the perfect wardrobe, and the perfect marriage to her husband Marcus. Marcus is a brilliant African-American architect who built a beautiful life for her, totally blind to the fact that Ashley's entire existence was a carefully curated lie fueled by massive hidden debt. While Ashley played dress-up on other people's dimes, I worked 60-hour weeks. I built a career from nothing. I met Julian, a senior forensic accountant, who saw me for who I really was, not the shadow my family forced me to be. We spent 3 grueling years saving every spare penny for our dream wedding. We skipped vacations, we drove old cars, and we ate cheap takeout on Friday nights, watching our savings account grow dollar by dollar. We finally hit our goal of $42,500. It was everything we needed for the venue, the caterer, the dress, the life we were about to start together. The illusion of my family's decency shattered on a random Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. It was the wedding caterer. She sounded deeply uncomfortable. Maya, she said, her voice tight, I am so sorry to call you about this, but the $15,000 deposit check you gave us yesterday just bounced. My heart stopped. The air in my office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I told her there had to be a mistake, a banking glitch. I hung up with trembling hands and immediately logged into my primary banking app. This was a legacy joint account my mother Patricia had set up for me when I was a teenager. I had been so stupid, so blindly trusting that I never thought to remove her name from it. The screen loaded. I stared at the balance in my mind, refusing to process the numbers in front of my eyes. The account read $0.00. A pending wire transfer showed that every single penny, all $42,500, had been completely drained. The morning it happened, I was sitting in my corner office on the 12th floor of a glass building in downtown Seattle. As a corporate finance manager, my entire professional life revolves around precision. I spend my days tracking multi-million-dollar quarterly projections, auditing massive corporate accounts, and ensuring every single penny aligns perfectly on a spreadsheet. I am meticulous. I am careful. I have to be. Growing up as the designated scapegoat in a family that only celebrated my older sister being flawless was the only way I could avoid criticism. I prided myself on my financial stability, which is why when my desk phone rang at exactly 10:15 that Tuesday morning, the conversation that followed felt like it was happening in an alternate universe. It was Elise, the owner of an exclusive boutique catering company. Julian and I had spent 6 months trying to book for our wedding. Securing her services was a massive victory for us. We were paying for the entire wedding ourselves without a single dime of help from my parents. Every vendor, every floral arrangement, every napkin was funded by the $42,500 Julian and I had scraped together over 3 years. When I picked up the phone, I expected Elise to ask about our final menu tasting or confirm the appetizer selections. Instead, there was a heavy, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. Maya Elise said, her voice tight with professional awkwardness. I'm so sorry to bother you at work, but I'm calling regarding the deposit for your reception. I smiled, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. Of course, Elise. Did the check clear okay? Actually, she said, taking a sharp breath, that is why I am calling. The $15,000 deposit check you gave us on Friday was returned to us this morning. It bounced due to insufficient funds. The air in my office completely vanished. My heart gave a violent, sickening lurch against my ribs. I sat forward so fast, my chair rolled back and hit the credenza. I am sorry, I said, my voice dropping to a panicked whisper. That is literally impossible. There must be a banking error on my end. I transferred the funds from my savings to my checking account specifically for that check. I understand Elise replied gently, but clearly anxious about her unpaid invoice. I know these things happen, but our policy requires the deposit to be secured immediately to hold your date. We have another couple on the wait list for your weekend. A hot flush of pure humiliation crawled up my neck and settled into my cheeks. As an accountant, bouncing a check is my absolute worst nightmare. It is a cardinal sin. I felt like a complete failure, a fraud who could not even manage her own wedding deposit. Elise, please do not release our date. I begged, my hands shaking as I grabbed my cell phone. I am logging into my banking portal right now. I will wire you the $15,000 directly within the hour. I promise you the money is there. She agreed to hold the date until noon, and I hung up the phone with a trembling hand. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I told myself to breathe. I told myself it was just a glitch. Banks make mistakes all the time. Systems freeze. Automated fraud alerts block large transactions. That had to be it. There was no other logical explanation. Julian and I had sacrificed too much for that money. I thought about the 3 years of skipped vacations, the skipped date nights, the overtime shifts we both pulled. Julian is a senior forensic accountant, and he took on grueling side contracts just to pad our savings. We drove beat-up sedans with over 100,000 miles on them. While my sister Ashley leased a brand new luxury SUV she could not actually afford. We lived in a modest apartment, meticulously tracking our grocery budgets, all so we could pay for our dream wedding in cash. That wedding fund was sacred. It was the physical manifestation of our freedom and our future. I unlocked my cell phone and tapped the icon for my banking app. The screen turned white, the little blue loading circle spinning endlessly. The corporate wireless network was always spotty in my office, and the delay felt like pure psychological torture. As the app struggled to authenticate, my mind raced through the structure of my accounts. My primary checking account was solely in my name, but the high-yield savings account where I kept the wedding fund was different. It was a legacy joint account. When I was 16 years old and got my very first job bussing tables at a local diner, my mother, Patricia, marched me into the local branch and set up a student account. She insisted her name had to be on it so she could monitor my spending and teach me financial responsibility. Over the years, the account simply transitioned into a standard adult savings account. I should have removed her name. I knew I should have removed her name. When I turned 21, I actually brought it up. I gently suggested that I was old enough to have a solo account. Patricia immediately burst into tears, playing the ultimate victim. She accused me of not trusting my own mother, of being secretive, of trying to cut her out of my life. She screamed that she had given me life and I was treating her like a criminal. To keep the peace, to avoid another screaming match that would inevitably end with me apologizing for hurting her feelings, I backed down. I left her name on the account. I never actually used her name on any checks or debit cards, and she never logged into it. For 12 years, it sat there, a silent tether to my toxic family. I trusted her, despite everything, despite a lifetime of watching her prioritize Ashley over me, despite watching her applaud my sister for doing the bare minimum while ignoring my massive achievements. I truly believed that my own mother would never cross the ultimate line. I believed there was a boundary she would not break. The banking app finally authenticated. My dashboard loaded. I immediately looked at the top row. My personal checking account showed a balance of $84. That made sense. I had transferred exactly $15,000 into it last week to cover the caterer, leaving just a small buffer. If the check bounced, the $15,000 should still be sitting right there. But it was not. My stomach twisted into a tight, agonizing knot. My fingers felt numb as I scrolled down the screen to the high-yield savings account, the account I had proudly nicknamed Maya and Julian Wedding Fund, the account that as of last Friday held exactly $42,500. I stared at the screen. The numbers refused to compute in my brain. The balance read $0.00. Available balance 0. Pending balance 0. I stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the corporate office outside my glass door completely faded away, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The world tilted on its axis. I pressed my palm flat against my desk to stop myself from falling out of my chair. No, I whispered into the empty room. No, no, no. This is a mistake. I frantically swiped down on the screen to refresh the app. The little blue circle spun again. I prayed to any higher power that would listen. I begged for the app to crash, for a server maintenance message to appear, for anything that would explain this horrific reality. The screen refreshed. The numbers remained exactly the same. $0 and 0 cents. A wave of sheer blinding panic washed over me. I clicked on the account details to open the recent transaction history. My eyes scanned the lines of data, desperate for an explanation. There were no mysterious debit card charges. There were no hacked online purchases. There were no small incremental withdrawals typical of identity theft. There was only one line item, dated Monday morning at 9:15 a.m. It read, outgoing domestic wire transfer. Authorized in branch. The withdrawal amount was exactly $42,500. Every single penny of my savings completely wiped out in one single transaction. My professional accounting background kicked in, analyzing the data with a cold, terrifying clarity. An outgoing domestic wire transfer of that magnitude cannot be done accidentally. It cannot be done by a random hacker from a remote location. A transfer of over $40,000 requires strict federal banking protocols. It requires the account holder to physically walk into a local bank branch. It requires them to sit down with a bank manager. It requires them to present a valid government-issued photo identification. It requires a physical handwritten signature on a wire authorization form. I had been sitting in this exact office chair all day Monday. I had not walked into a bank. I had not presented my identification. I had not signed a wire transfer form. There was only one other person on the entire planet whose name was on that account. Only one other person who could legally walk into that branch, show a driver license, and authorize the complete liquidation of those funds. My mother. Patricia had walked into the bank and drained my wedding fund. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The woman who gave birth to me, the woman who had watched me exhaust myself for 3 years to save that money. The woman who had smiled in my face at Sunday dinner while I excitedly talked about the catering menu had deliberately and methodically stolen everything I had. She did not just take a little to cover an emergency. She did not ask to borrow a few $1,000s. She took the exact balance. She cleaned it out to the very last cent. She knew exactly what that money was for. She knew it was the foundation of the life Julian and I were building. She knew, and she simply did not care. I sat in my office clutching my cell phone as tears finally spilled over my eyelashes and dropped onto the glass screen, blurring the horrific zero balance. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I was 28 years old, a successful corporate finance manager, and I was currently sobbing at my desk because my own mother had robbed me blind. I wiped my eyes with the back of my trembling hand. The panic slowly began to recede, replaced by a cold, radiating shock. I clicked on the wire transfer details, expanding the transaction receipt to see the destination account. The banking app displayed the routing number and the final 4 digits of the receiving checking account. I recognized those last 4 digits immediately. I had transferred $50 to that exact account 2 weeks ago for my sister's birthday present. The wire transfer had not gone to a creditor. It had not gone to an emergency hospital bill. My mother had taken my $42,500 wedding fund and wired it directly into Ashley's personal bank account. The golden child had struck again, and my mother had funded it with my future. I did not even lock my computer screen. I grabbed my purse, shoved my arms into my trench coat, and walked out of my office. My assistant asked if I was okay, but I pushed past her, muttering something about a family emergency. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like it took a lifetime. Every floor dinged with a mocking cheerfulness that made my stomach churn. When I finally reached my car, my hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my keys twice onto the concrete floor before I could manage to unlock the door. The drive to the local bank branch was a complete blur. I navigated the busy downtown streets purely on muscle memory, my mind trapped in a terrifying loop. I kept seeing my mother sitting across from me at our traditional Sunday dinners, asking me detailed questions about the floral arrangements and the catering menu, knowing full well she was planning to steal every single dollar I had bled for. I pulled into the bank parking lot and slammed the gear shift into park. I sat there for a fraction of a second, staring at the sterile brick building. Part of me wanted to turn the car around. Part of me wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But the cold, hard reality of the zero balance on my phone pushed me out of the driver's seat. I walked through the sliding glass doors of the bank. The air conditioning hit me like a physical wall. The branch was quiet, smelling of strong generic coffee and lemon-scented cleaning supplies. I bypassed the teller line and walked directly to the customer service desks. A young branch manager named David looked up from his computer, his professional smile faltering the second he saw my face. I sat down in the stiff leather chair across from him before he could even offer it. "I need you to pull up my savings account immediately," I said, my voice sounding completely foreign to my own ears. I handed him my driver license. An unauthorized wire transfer cleared my account this morning. It drained the entire balance. $42,500 is gone. David immediately sat up straight, his fingers flying across his keyboard. He took my identification, verified my details, and clicked through his system. The silence in his cubicle stretched out heavy and suffocating. I watched his eyes scan the monitor. I watched his brow furrow. I watched the exact moment his professional concern shifted into deep, uncomfortable pity. "Maya," he started, his voice dropping to a low, careful tone. "I see the transaction you are referring to. The funds were wired out at 9:15 on Monday morning. But this was not an unauthorized or fraudulent transfer from an outside source." I shook my head, my fingernails digging into the armrests of the chair. "I was at work on Monday morning," I told him, my voice rising in pitch. "I did not authorize this. I did not sign anything. I want to file a fraud report right now." David turned his monitor slightly so I could see the screen. He clicked on a digital document attached to the transaction record. "Maya, this account is a joint account. There are two primary account holders with equal withdrawal privileges. The wire transfer was initiated in person at our suburban branch. The other account holder walked in, presented valid identification, and physically signed the wire authorization form." He clicked again, bringing up a scanned copy of the paperwork. I stared at the bright white screen. There it was, my mother's signature, Patricia Myers, written in her looping, aggressive handwriting. She had signed her name with absolute confidence on a document that wiped out my future. And right below her signature was the destination account information. David pointed to the receiving routing number. The funds were wired to a domestic checking account under the name Ashley Myers. "Do you recognize the recipient?" My lungs physically burned. I recognized it. I recognized it perfectly. It was my sister's personal checking account, the golden child. The sister who lived in a luxury downtown loft with her highly successful African-American husband, Marcus. Marcus was a brilliant architect who provided her with an incredible life. Yet she was constantly maxing out credit cards to maintain her fake influencer aesthetic online. And my mother had decided that my wedding fund, the money Julian and I had saved by sacrificing our 20s, was the perfect piggy bank to fund Ashley's endless greed. "Yes?" I whispered, staring blindly at my mother's signature. I recognized the recipient. David looked at me with deep sympathy. "I am so sorry, Maya. Because your mother is a legal joint owner on this specific account, she had every legal right to withdraw those funds. The bank cannot reverse the wire or flag it as fraud. As far as the institution is concerned, this was a legitimate transaction." I asked him to print the authorization form. He handed me the warm, freshly printed paper. It felt heavy in my hands. It was the physical proof of my mother's ultimate betrayal. I thanked David, stood up on trembling legs, and walked out of the bank. The bright afternoon sunlight felt completely offensive. I climbed back into my car and locked the doors. The silence inside the vehicle was deafening. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my mother's number. The phone rang once. It rang twice. On the third ring, it was abruptly sent to voicemail. She had hit the decline button. I knew her habits. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was sitting in her pristine living room, staring at my name on her caller identification and actively choosing to ignore me. She knew I had found out. She knew the caterer's check had bounced. She knew my world was currently collapsing, and she simply did not care. I redialed. It went straight to voicemail again. A raw, guttural sob tore out of my throat. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat and buried my face in my hands. The tears came hot and fast, fueled by a lifetime of being pushed aside, of being told my needs were secondary to Ashley's desires. I cried for the wedding dress I would have to cancel. I cried for the venue we would have to release. I cried because I finally realized that my mother did not just favor my sister, she actively viewed my happiness as something she was entitled to steal. After 10 minutes of uncontrollable sobbing, I picked up my phone again and dialed Julian. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, beautiful," he said, his deep voice warm and relaxed. How are the quarterly projections looking, Julian? I gasped, unable to hold back the fresh wave of tears. Julian, it is gone. The money is gone. The wedding fund is gone. The line went deadly silent. I could hear the immediate shift in his breathing. What do you mean it is gone, Maya? Where are you? Are you safe? I am in the parking lot at the bank, I choked out, clutching the steering wheel. My mother took it. She walked into the branch on Monday and wired all $42,500 to Ashley's checking account. The caterer called me. Our deposit bounced. Julian, we have nothing left. Stay exactly where you are, Julian said. His voice was no longer the warm, relaxed tone of my fiancé. It was the sharp, absolute tone of a senior forensic accountant. Lock your doors. Do not call your mother again. I am leaving my office right now. I will be there in 10 minutes. I sat in the car, clutching the printed wire transfer form, struggling to draw oxygen into my lungs. Exactly 12 minutes later, Julian's sedan whipped into the parking space next to mine. He threw his car into park, jumped out, and opened my passenger door. He slid into the seat next to me, bringing with him the familiar, comforting scent of cedar and clean laundry. He did not ask me if I was okay. He knew I was not. He just reached across the console and pulled me into his chest. I buried my face in his shoulder, sobbing all over again as the reality of our ruined wedding crashed down on me. I am so sorry, I cried into his shirt. I should have taken her name off the account. I was so stupid. I ruined everything. Julian gently pulled back, framing my face with his large, warm hands. He used his thumbs to wipe the tears tracking down my cheeks. His dark eyes were burning with a quiet, terrifying intensity. You did not ruin anything, he said firmly. You trusted your mother. That is not a crime. What she did is the crime. He looked down at the center console and saw the printed wire transfer authorization form. He picked it up. His eyes scanned the document, absorbing the routing numbers, the timestamps, the signatures, and the exact dollar amounts. I watched his posture change. I watched the loving, supportive fiancé tuck himself away, and I watched the ruthless financial auditor take the wheel. Julian deals with corporate embezzlers, hidden offshore accounts, and financial fraudsters every single day for a living. He destroys people who hide money. Julian folded the document perfectly in half. He looked at me, his expression completely devoid of panic. He was entirely calm, and his calmness terrified me in the best possible way. Don't cry, Julian said, his voice deadly quiet and razor-sharp. We are not going to call her again. We are not going to beg for our money back. We are not going to ask for an apology. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. Then what are we going to do? Julian slid the folded document into his inner jacket pocket. He looked out the windshield, his jaw set like stone. We are going to audit them. We are going to rip open every single financial lie your sister has ever told her husband. We are going to track every penny your mother has ever moved. They wanted to play a financial game with a forensic accountant. So we are going to play. And we are going to burn their entire fake reality to the ground. My mother hosted family dinner every Sunday at 4 o'clock sharp. It was a mandatory performance where we were all expected to gather around her mahogany dining table and applaud whatever minor accomplishment my sister Ashley had achieved that week. Julian and I usually arrived exactly on time, carrying a side dish and bracing ourselves for 2 hours of passive-aggressive comments. But today, we were not bringing a side dish, and we were not interested in keeping the peace. We pulled into my mother's pristine suburban driveway at 3:15. My hands were gripping the leather portfolio in my lap so tightly my knuckles ached. Julian reached over and placed his hand over mine. His touch was warm and steady. He did not say a word, but the look in his dark eyes told me everything I needed to know. We were in this together, and we were not going to back down. I took a deep breath, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of my mother's manicured rose bushes. It all looked so painfully normal, a picture-perfect American home hiding a staggering betrayal inside. We walked up the brick pathway. I did not knock. I simply turned the brass handle and pushed the heavy front door open. The immediate sounds of the house hit me like a physical blow. I could hear the clinking of crystal wine glasses and the bright, trilling sound of my sister's laughter drifting from the formal dining room. The rich smell of roasted garlic and rosemary filled the air. It was the scent of my childhood, a scent that usually meant comfort, but today it just made me feel sick to my stomach. Julian stayed right beside me as we walked down the hallway, our footsteps silent on the thick carpet. As we reached the arched doorway of the dining room, I stopped and simply watched them for a moment. They had not noticed us yet. They were too busy celebrating themselves. My mother sat at the head of the table pouring a generous glass of expensive red wine. Ashley was seated to her right, wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. Next to Ashley sat her husband Marcus. Marcus was a brilliant, hardworking African-American architect who had spent the last 5 years building a highly successful firm from the ground up. He was a genuinely good man, kind and patient, and he looked completely exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, the kind of fatigue that comes from carrying the weight of a lifestyle he was desperately trying to maintain for his wife. But Ashley did not look tired. Ashley looked radiant. She was holding her left wrist up in the air, tilting it so the afternoon sunlight caught the absolute blinding sparkle of a brand new diamond tennis bracelet. "It is just exquisite," my mother was saying, reaching over to touch the diamonds. "You have such wonderful taste, darling." Ashley beamed, taking a sip of her wine. "I know," she said, her voice dripping with artificial modesty. "I just happened to walk past the jeweler on Fifth Avenue yesterday, and it completely caught my eye. Marcus has been working such incredibly long hours at the firm lately, and we have just been so stressed. I told him we absolutely needed something positive to lift our spirits. And honestly, it pairs perfectly with the resort where I just bought for our trip." She turned to Marcus, placing her manicured hand on his shoulder. Marcus offered a tight, polite smile, though his eyes looked incredibly heavy. "I am just so glad we booked the Maldives," Ashley continued, her voice echoing off the dining room walls. "We leave in 2 weeks. A spontaneous luxury getaway is exactly what we need to just unplug and reconnect. Overwater bungalows, private chefs, couples, massages on the beach. It is going to be absolute heaven. I really feel like we deserve it after the month we have had." My mother nodded enthusiastically, raising her wineglass toward Ashley. "You absolutely deserve it, sweetie. Marriage is hard work, and you need to protect your peace. You both need to focus on each other right now." I stood in the doorway, listening to them casually discuss overwater bungalows and diamond bracelets. The $42,500 my mother had stolen from my wedding fund was currently sparkling on my sister's wrist and funding her tropical island fantasy. A hot, blinding wave of fury washed over me, burning away the last remaining traces of the scared, accommodating daughter I had been for 28 years. I did not shrink. I did not apologize for existing. I stepped straight into the dining room. My mother saw me first. Her wine glass halted halfway to her mouth. The warm, indulgent smile she had been giving Ashley instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. "Maya," she said sharply, her tone dripping with irritation, "you are 45 minutes early. We have not even finished our appetizers yet. And why did you not knock? You know I hate it when people just barge into the house." Ashley dropped her wrist, her diamond bracelet clinking against the mahogany table. She let out a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes as if my mere presence was an unbearable inconvenience. "Great," she muttered. "The mood is officially ruined." Marcus looked up, his polite smile returning as he shifted in his chair. "Hey, Maya. Hey, Julian," he said, his deep voice carrying a genuine warmth the other two completely lacked. "We were not expecting you guys this early. Come on in, grab a seat." I did not greet Marcus. I did not respond to my mother's scolding. I did not look at my sister's rolling eyes. I walked with slow, deliberate steps directly to the head of the dining table. Julian stood right behind my right shoulder, a silent, towering wall of absolute support. The annoyance on my mother's face began to shift into something else as I stopped right next to her chair. I opened the leather portfolio in my hands. I pulled out the banking printout, the paper still warm from my office printer, bearing the undeniable verified proof of the massive wire transfer and her forged signature. I did not say hello. I did not ask for permission to speak. I raised my hand and slammed the banking record face up onto the center of the mahogany table. The sharp, violent smack of paper hitting wood echoed like a gunshot, silencing the entire room instantly. The sound of the heavy paper slapping against the solid wood table seemed to vibrate through the dining room. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The crystal wine glasses sat untouched. The rich smell of roasted garlic suddenly felt suffocating. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my mother. I watched her gaze drop from my face down to the printed banking record. I waited for the shock. I waited for her to gasp and tell me there had been a terrible mistake. I waited for the mother I thought I knew to deny doing something so incredibly cruel. But the shock never came. Instead, I watched her eyes scan the highlighted wire transfer amount and the forged signature. Her expression did not crumble into guilt. It hardened into a wall of cold, defensive irritation. She slowly picked up her linen napkin and dabbed the corner of her mouth, perfectly composed. She looked back up at me with an expression of sheer annoyance, like I had just spilled water on her expensive rug. "What is the meaning of this?" "Maya," my mother asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You storm into my house during Sunday dinner and throw bank statements on my table like a common thug. Have you lost your mind?" I placed both of my hands flat on the edge of the mahogany table, leaning in just an inch. My voice was shaking, but I forced the words out loud and clear. "That is a printed record of the $42,500 you wired out of my savings account on Monday morning. That was my entire wedding fund. The caterer called me today because my deposit check bounced. You walked into the branch and you emptied the account. Where is my money, Mum?" Ashley shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but she did not look surprised. She did not look horrified. She just looked down at her manicured nails. Marcus, however, frowned deeply. He looked from the paper to my mother and then to me. "Patricia." "What is Maya talking about?" Marcus asked, his deep voice filled with genuine confusion. "What wedding fund?" My mother waved her hand dismissively in the air as if she were swatting away a fly. "Oh, please, Marcus, do not let her dramatic theatrics ruin our dinner. Maya is just being completely unreasonable as usual." "Unreasonable?" I choked out the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You stole over $40,000 from me. You stole the money Julian and I spent 3 years sacrificing for. We skipped meals. We drove broken-down cars. We saved every single penny. And you took it without even asking." "I did not steal anything." My mother snapped, her voice finally rising to meet my anger. "That account had my name on it, Maya. It is legally my account just as much as it is yours. I had every legal right to withdraw those funds at any time. You're acting like a hysterical child." I felt Julian step closer behind me, a solid, immovable force. He did not speak, but his presence gave me the strength to keep standing. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal. "Why would you do that to me? What could possibly justify taking everything I have worked so hard to build?" My mother looked at Ashley, and then she looked at Marcus. A heavy, tense silence fell over the room. My mother took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive red wine. When she set the glass down, she looked me dead in the eye with absolutely zero remorse. "I took the money because your sister was in a crisis." My mother stated, her tone completely matter-of-fact. "Marcus found out about some credit card balances last week. He was very upset. He was talking about separating. Ashley was devastated. She made some silly financial mistakes, trying to keep up a nice lifestyle for her husband, and he was ready to throw their entire marriage away over some silly plastic cards." I stared at her, trying to process the absolute insanity of her words. Ashley had maxed out her credit cards, buying designer clothes and luxury handbags for her fake influencer lifestyle. She had dug a massive financial hole entirely on her own. "So to fix her mistakes, you decided to rob me," I asked, my chest heaving. "You stole my wedding fund to pay off her shopping addiction." "Do not use that tone with me, Maya," my mother warned, gripping the edge of the table. "Your sister was going to lose her husband. I had to intervene. I paid off the credit card companies to wipe the slate clean so Marcus would not leave her. And I booked them that luxury trip to the Maldives so they could have a fresh start and reconnect away from all the stress. Family protects family, Maya. You know that. I did what I had to do to protect your sister. You stole my future to buy her a vacation." I whispered, tears finally spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. "We cannot even afford our caterer anymore. Our wedding is completely ruined." My mother let out a long, exasperated sigh. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "Maya, you and Julian can just go down to the courthouse and get a simple marriage license. You do not need a fancy, expensive party. You are just an accountant. It is not like you have a massive social circle to impress anyway." Then came the words that finally broke the last remaining bond I had with the woman who gave birth to me. "Your sister needs it more," my mother said, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of a judge delivering a final verdict. "Ashley has an image to maintain. She has a prominent husband. She has expectations. At least her marriage is actually worth saving." The room spun. I felt like I had been physically gutted. At least her marriage is actually worth saving. In my mother's eyes, my life, my career, my relationship with Julian meant absolutely nothing. We were just collateral damage, acceptable losses in the endless campaign to keep Ashley on a pedestal. I looked at my sister. Ashley was tracing the rim of her crystal wine glass with one perfectly polished finger. She did not look guilty. She did not look ashamed. She slowly raised her head and looked right at me. And then she smirked. It was a tiny, terrible lifting of the corner of her mouth, a silent, arrogant victory. She had stolen my money, stolen my wedding, and she was actively enjoying my pain. But there was one person at the table who was not smiling. Marcus. Marcus was sitting perfectly still, staring at his wife. The exhaustion on his face had been replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. His hands were resting flat on the mahogany table, and I could see his fingers trembling slightly. He looked at the diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on Ashley's wrist, and then he looked at the bank printout sitting in front of my mother. "Wait," Marcus said, his voice strangely quiet. The room immediately grew tense. Marcus looked directly at my mother, his dark eyes burning. "Patricia, you told me that money was an early inheritance." My mother stiffened, her confident posture faltering for the very first time. "Marcus, please, let us not discuss this right now. We are having family dinner." "You told me it was an early inheritance?" Marcus repeated, his voice growing louder, more forceful. "When I found the hidden credit card statements last week, Ashley owed over $30,000. I told her I was done. I told her I could not stay married to someone who lied to me and put our financial future in jeopardy. And then you showed up, Patricia. You handed me a certified bank check. You said you were cashing out a long-term family trust early to give Ashley her inheritance so we could start over." Marcus turned his head slowly to look at Ashley. The golden child physically shrank under his intense, furious gaze. The smirk vanished from her face, completely replaced by genuine panic. "You told me you were sorry," Marcus said to his wife, his voice cracking with emotion. "You cried. You swore you would never lie to me again. You said your mother was giving you your inheritance early to prove how much your family supported our marriage. You told me the Maldives trip was a gift from your parents to help us heal." Marcus pointed a shaking finger at the printed bank record on the table. "Are you telling me that you wiped away your secret massive debt and bought yourself a luxury vacation using Maya's stolen wedding money? Are you telling me this diamond bracelet on your wrist was bought with money your mother stole from your own sister?" "Marcus, baby, please listen to me," Ashley pleaded, reaching out to grab his arm. "Mom just wanted to help us. We can pay Maya back eventually. It is really not that big of a deal." Marcus violently yanked his arm away from her touch, as if she were made of fire. He pushed his chair back from the table, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. He stood up, a tall, imposing figure of a man who had just realized his entire life was a carefully constructed fraud. I felt Julian shift behind me. The entire dynamic of the room had just violently ruptured. My mother was scrambling to find words to placate Marcus. Ashley was beginning to cry fake performative tears, begging her husband to sit back down and listen to her. They were so entirely focused on saving their own skins that they completely forgot about the man standing silently at my back. They completely forgot about Julian. They thought they could just steal from me and explain it away. They thought Marcus would just accept the money and move on. They thought I would just put my head down, cry, and walk away empty-handed like I always did. But they did not know Julian. They did not know the kind of man I was marrying. The silence in the dining room felt heavier than concrete. For my entire life, I had been conditioned to fill that silence with an apology. Whenever my mother Patricia was displeased, whenever my sister Ashley was upset, it was always my job to smooth things over, to shrink myself down, to make myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I was the designated shock absorber for their toxic behavior. Even now, standing in the wreckage of my own stolen future, a tiny conditioned part of my brain screamed at me to apologize for causing a scene. But the $42,500 they stole from me anchored my feet to the hardwood floor. I looked at Ashley, who was desperately trying to force out real tears, grabbing at her husband Marcus. Marcus looked like a man who had just watched his entire reality crumble into dust. He had built a highly successful architecture firm from the ground up, pouring his blood, sweat, and tears into providing a beautiful life for a woman who was secretly bleeding him dry. Patricia was frantically trying to rewrite the narrative. She stepped toward Marcus, her hands raised in a placating gesture, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she used to manipulate bank tellers and country club presidents. "Marcus, dear," she cooed, stepping around the mahogany table. "You are overreacting." Ashley was just overwhelmed. We kept this between us because we wanted to protect your marriage. You have to understand that as a mother, I simply could not watch my daughter lose the man she loves over a few silly financial missteps. The money Maya had saved was just sitting in an account, doing absolutely nothing. Ashley needed it to save her family. It was an investment in your future together. Marcus did not even look at her. He kept his dark, furious eyes locked on Ashley, who was now openly weeping, begging him to understand. He looked down at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. The diamonds caught the afternoon light, throwing tiny mocking rainbows across the walls of the dining room. Every single sparkle represented hours of my life that Julian and I had sacrificed. I felt a subtle shift in the air right behind my shoulder. Up until this exact second, Julian had been a silent, immovable wall of support at my back. He had let me take the lead. He had let me confront the woman who gave birth to me. He had let me slam the bank printout onto the table. He knew I needed to take my power back with my own two hands. But watching Patricia try to gaslight Marcus, watching Ashley try to manipulate her way out of grand theft, something inside Julian snapped shut like a steel trap. Julian is not a man prone to explosive anger. As a senior forensic accountant, his entire career is built on cold, hard, undeniable facts. He spends his days tracking down corporate embezzlers, unearthing hidden offshore accounts, and dismantling complex financial frauds. He knows how liars operate. He knows exactly how they breathe, how they pivot, how they attempt to twist reality when they are cornered. And he has absolutely zero tolerance for it. Julian took one slow, deliberate step forward. He moved past me, placing his tall, broad frame firmly between me and the toxic venom radiating from my mother and sister. The physical act of him stepping in front of me felt like a shield slamming into place. For 28 years, I had fought my family entirely alone. Every holiday dinner, every ruined birthday, every casual insult about my career choice or my clothes, I had absorbed by myself. Seeing this man stepping into the line of fire to protect me brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. But this time they were not tears of humiliation. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. Julian stopped at the edge of the mahogany table. He is a tall man, and in that moment, he seemed to tower over the entire room, casting a long shadow over Patricia and Ashley. The casual, relaxed energy he usually carried was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying, focused intensity of an auditor who has just found the smoking gun. Patricia stopped her frantic placating of Marcus. She looked up at Julian, her carefully maintained mask slipping to reveal pure, unadulterated irritation. This was her house. This was her dining room. She was used to controlling every single variable within these walls. "Excuse me, Julian," my mother snapped, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. "This is a private family matter. Maya has already caused enough drama for one afternoon. I suggest you take your fiancé and leave before you make things any worse for your sister." Julian did not flinch. He did not blink. He did not even acknowledge that my mother had spoken. He reached his right hand inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. The room went dead silent again. The only sound was the faint rustle of heavy paper as Julian slowly withdrew a thick manila envelope from his coat. The envelope was bulging, stuffed with documents, printouts, and photographs. It was the physical culmination of the last 48 hours of our lives. While I had been paralyzed by grief and betrayal, Julian had gone to work. He had utilized every investigative tool at his disposal, pulling public records, tracing digital footprints, and following the money trail with ruthless precision. Julian held the thick manila envelope in his hand for a brief, suspended second. He looked at Patricia, then he looked at Ashley. His dark eyes were utterly void of any warmth or sympathy. He tossed the envelope onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a heavy, substantial thud right next to the bank printout showing the stolen $42,500. The sound seemed to break the spell, holding the room hostage. Ashley jumped back slightly, her eyes darting from the envelope to Julian. Patricia stared at the brown paper, her jaw tightening with furious apprehension. Then Julian delivered the words that completely shattered the remaining fragile glass of their manufactured reality. "You said Maya is ungrateful." Julian began, his voice dangerously low, incredibly calm and echoing with absolute finality. "You said she should sacrifice her future because Ashley's marriage is the only one actually worth saving." He leaned forward, resting both hands flat on the polished mahogany, mirroring my earlier stance, but amplifying the intimidation tenfold. "Then none of you deserve to come to our wedding," he stated. The words were a physical strike. Patricia literally took a step backward, her mouth dropping open in sheer disbelief. In her narcissistic worldview, she held the keys to the kingdom. She believed she was the ultimate authority who dictated who was included and who was excluded. The idea that she was being banished from her own daughter's wedding, that she would be denied the opportunity to play the gracious mother of the bride. In front of her country club friends was a blow to her ego she could not comprehend. Ashley stopped crying. Her fake tears dried up instantly, replaced by a look of sheer bewildered panic. She looked at the thick envelope sitting on the table and then looked back up at Julian. She knew deep down in the dark, hollow core of her fraudulent life that she had secrets. She knew she had lied about far more than just a few maxed-out credit cards. And looking at the cold, calculating confidence in Julian's eyes, she suddenly realized he had found them. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home?" Patricia shrieked, her voice pitching upward into a hysterical register. "You do not get to come into my dining room and dictate who attends a family event. You are nothing but an arrogant accountant. You do not understand how this family works. Maya is my daughter. You will not disrespect me." Julian did the most devastating thing he could possibly do to a woman like my mother. He completely ignored her. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not offer a single word of rebuttal. He simply turned his head and cut her out of his line of sight, effectively erasing her existence in the room. For a woman whose entire identity was built on demanding attention and demanding compliance, being treated as utterly irrelevant was the ultimate psychological destruction. Patricia stood there, her mouth open, speechless, sputtering as Julian completely dismissed her. Julian bypassed Ashley entirely as well, treating her crying and her diamond bracelet as nothing more than background noise. He turned his body and his intense focus directly onto Marcus. Marcus was still standing on the other side of the table. He was a proud, highly intelligent African-American man who had worked his entire life to overcome obstacles and build a stellar reputation in a competitive industry. He had fallen in love with Ashley, believing she shared his values of hard work and integrity. He had bought her the luxury loft, he had paid for her expensive vacations. He had given her a life of privilege because he believed she was his equal partner. Watching the horror dawn on his face as he realized he was married to a parasite had been agonizing. But Julian looked at Marcus with profound, genuine respect. It was the look of one hard-working man acknowledging another. It was a silent communication between two men who understood the value of a dollar earned through grueling, honest labor. Julian knew Marcus was a victim in this scenario just as much as I was. Marcus had been lied to, gaslit, and financially manipulated by the exact same toxic women who had just robbed me. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice shifting from the cold tone he had used on my mother to a tone of calm professional solidarity. "I know you thought your wife just had a shopping problem. I know Patricia told you she cashed out a family trust to save your marriage. They wanted you to believe this was just a minor bump in the road. They wanted you to take that trip to the Maldives and forget you ever found those credit card statements." Julian pointed a long, steady finger at the thick manila envelope resting in the center of the table. "But that money did not come from a family trust," Marcus. Julian continued, holding the architect's gaze. "It came from my fiancé. It came from the money Maya and I spent 3 years saving. And more importantly, it did not go toward paying off joint credit cards." Marcus stared at Julian, his chest rising and falling with heavy, uneven breaths. He looked down at the envelope, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. The veins in his forearms stood out sharply against his dark skin. He was a man holding on to his self-control by a terrifyingly thin thread. "What is in the envelope?" Julian, Marcus asked, his voice barely a rough whisper. Ashley lunged forward, her manicured hands scrambling across the mahogany wood, desperately trying to grab the manila folder. "No," she screamed, her voice shrill and panicked. "Do not look at it, Marcus. It is lies. They are just trying to ruin us because they are jealous. Maya has always been jealous of me. Do not open it." Marcus moved faster. He reached out and snatched the thick envelope right out from under Ashley's desperate, grasping fingers. He stepped back, holding the folder against his chest, looking at his wife with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound betrayal. "If it is lies, Ashley, then let me read them," Marcus said, his voice echoing with a chilling, devastating calmness. Julian stood tall, observing the scene with the precision of a surgeon watching a scalpel hit the mark. He had brought the absolute truth into a house built entirely on lies. He had handed the weapon directly to the one man who had the power to dismantle Ashley's perfectly curated fake reality. I stood behind Julian, feeling the frantic pounding of my own heart slowly begin to steady. For 28 years, I had been forced to watch my sister get away with absolutely everything. I had been forced to watch my mother shield her, protect her, and fund her at my expense. I had been told over and over again that I was secondary, that my needs were irrelevant, that my money was their money. But as Marcus slowly broke the seal on that thick manila envelope, pulling out the stack of heavily audited documents Julian had prepared, I knew the era of the golden child was officially over. The protective bubble my mother had built around Ashley was about to burst violently and publicly. Julian had not just stood up for our wedding, he had stood up for my entire life, and he had just handed Marcus the exact paperwork needed to bring their entire fraudulent world crashing down to the floor. I watched Marcus pull the first document from the stack, and I took a long, deep breath of air. The reckoning had finally arrived. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a massive inevitable collapse. My mother stood frozen, her hands hovering uselessly in the air, unable to find a way to spin this new, terrifying reality. She had spent decades crafting a narrative where she was the benevolent matriarch and Ashley was the flawless success story. She had relied on my compliance and my silence to maintain that fiction. She had relied on Marcus being too busy and too trusting to ever look closely at the numbers. But she had not accounted for Julian. She had vastly underestimated the man standing in front of her. She looked at his broad shoulders, his unwavering posture, and the absolute certainty in his eyes, and for the first time in my entire life, I saw genuine fear cross my mother's face. She looked down at the banking printout I had slammed on the table, the irrefutable proof of her theft. Then she looked at the thick manila envelope now firmly in Marcus's grip, the undeniable proof of her daughter's devastating secrets. The two documents sat there, representing the complete destruction of everything she had worked so hard to protect. Julian did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply stood there, a silent guardian, ensuring that the truth could no longer be hidden, swept under the rug, or blamed on the scapegoat daughter. He had drawn the line in the sand, and he had placed me safely on his side of it. Marcus held the documents tightly, his eyes scanning the first page, the muscles in his jaw locked. The truth was out, and there was absolutely no going back. Marcus stared down at the first page of the heavy stack of documents Julian had provided. The room was so incredibly quiet that I could hear the faint sound of Marcus drawing in a sharp breath. His eyes darted rapidly across the highlighted lines of text. Julian stood completely still. He did not rush Marcus. A forensic accountant knows that the numbers tell a story, and sometimes you just have to let the victim read the story for themselves. Ashley was trembling now. Her fake bravado had completely evaporated. She took a step toward her husband, reaching her hand out, but Marcus flinched away from her touch without even looking up from the paper. Julian finally broke the silence. His voice was a low, steady rumble that commanded absolute attention. "Patricia told you that she paid off $30,000 of joint credit card debt to save your marriage," Julian said. He pointed to the document in Marcus's hands. "Look at the routing numbers, Marcus. Look at the destination accounts. When my fiancé realized her wedding fund had been completely wiped out, I did what I do for a living. I ran a comprehensive forensic trace on the wire transfer Patricia authorized. I spent the last 48 hours tearing through public records, digital footprints, and corporate filings. The money Patricia stole from Maya did not go to any major credit card company. It did not go to Visa, or MasterCard, or American Express." Marcus flipped to the second page. His dark eyes widened. He let out a ragged breath. "Where did it go?" Marcus asked, his voice sounding hollow and raw. Julian looked directly at Ashley. Ashley squeezed her eyes shut and shook her head, a pathetic attempt to stop the inevitable. "It went to a private holding company," Julian stated clearly. "A holding company registered to a man who specializes in high-interest short-term private loans. He is a glorified loan shark, Marcus. Your wife did not just max out her credit cards buying designer clothes. She took out a massive predatory loan to fund a completely separate shadow lifestyle that she was desperately trying to keep hidden from you. The remaining $12,500 from Maya's stolen wedding fund did not go toward paying down any shared debt. It went directly into a secondary secret checking account that Ashley opened solely in her own name 3 years ago. Patricia stepped forward, her face twisting in confusion. "What are you talking about?" my mother demanded, her voice shrill. "Ashley told me she just got a little carried away at the boutique stores. She told me she needed help. She said Marcus was going to leave her over a few shopping sprees." Julian did not even look at Patricia. He kept his unwavering focus on Marcus. "Turn to page 4, Marcus," Julian instructed calmly. Marcus turned the page. His hands were shaking so severely that the paper rattled in the quiet dining room. He stared at the new document. It was a commercial lease agreement. The blood completely drained from Marcus's face. He looked up at Julian, absolute devastation carving deep lines into his features. "That is a 12-month residential lease for a luxury studio apartment in the downtown arts district," Julian explained. "It was signed 18 months ago. The monthly rent is $3,400. The tenant listed on the lease is your wife. The emergency contact listed on the lease is not you, Marcus. It is a man named David Vance." Ashley let out a loud, hysterical sob. She covered her face with her hands, backing away until she hit the edge of the mahogany dining table. She was trapped. There was nowhere left to run, no more lies she could spin to save herself. Marcus looked at Ashley. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "You told me you needed a private workspace to film your social media content," Marcus said, the words heavy with betrayal. "You told me you were renting a cheap shared studio with 2 other girls from your yoga class. You asked me to help you cover the $500 monthly fee. I gave you that money every single month." Julian nodded slowly. "She took your $500, Marcus, but she paid the remaining $2,900 every month using that high-interest private loan. She dug herself into a massive financial hole to secure a luxury apartment that you were never allowed to visit. And she did not use that apartment to film social media content." Patricia let out a loud gasp. She looked at her golden child, the daughter she had placed on a pedestal her entire life, the daughter she had stolen my wedding fund to protect. "Ashley," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do? What is he talking about?" Julian pulled a sleek black tablet from his inside pocket. He tapped the screen a few times and placed it gently on the dining table, right on top of the documents Marcus was holding. "Press play," Julian said. Marcus reached out with a trembling finger and tapped the screen. The video was clear, high-definition security footage Julian had legally obtained through a public records request connected to a recent police incident report at that exact downtown apartment building. The footage showed the hallway outside Ashley's secret studio. The timestamp on the bottom corner indicated it was taken just 3 weeks ago on a Friday night at 11:45. In the video, Ashley was wearing a tight black dress. She was laughing, leaning against the apartment door. A tall man with dark hair stood next to her. It was the man named David. The video showed David pulling Ashley in by the waist. They kissed passionately, deeply before Ashley unlocked the door and pulled him inside the apartment with her. The tablet screen went black. Went Haj and Maid. The silence in the dining room returned heavier and more suffocating than before. I stood completely paralyzed, watching the absolute destruction of my sister's perfect facade. For my entire life, Patricia had told me that Ashley was the standard I needed to measure myself against. Ashley was graceful. Ashley was successful. Ashley had the perfect marriage to a wonderful, successful African-American architect who adored her. And now, the truth was laid bare on the mahogany table. Ashley was a liar, a fraud, and a serial cheater who had funded her illicit affairs, using predatory loans, my stolen wedding money, and Marcus's blind trust. Marcus stared at the black screen of the tablet. He did not yell. He did not throw the tablet across the room. He just stood there, his broad shoulders rising and falling with slow, agonizing breaths. He looked at Ashley. She was sobbing openly now, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup, her hands desperately reaching out toward him. "Marcus, please," Ashley begged, her voice high and pathetic. "It meant nothing. It was just a stupid mistake. I was stressed. You were always working at the firm. I felt so alone. I just wanted someone to pay attention to me. The money mom just wanted to help me fix it so we could go to the Maldives and start over. I love you, Marcus. Please." Marcus slowly shook his head. The raw pain in his eyes was instantly replaced by a cold, impenetrable wall of absolute disgust. He looked at the diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on Ashley's wrist. The bracelet my mother had proudly claimed was a spontaneous gift to lift their spirits. "You bought that bracelet yesterday," Marcus said, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. You told me you bought it with the bonus from your brand partnership, but you do not have any brand partnerships, do you, Ashley? You bought it with your sister's wedding money. You paid off your loan shark. You paid the rent on your cheating apartment. And then you bought yourself diamonds just to flaunt them in front of Maya today. Ashley opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just let out another loud, dramatic sob, sinking down into one of the dining chairs, as if her legs could no longer support her. Patricia stepped forward frantically, waving her hands. Marcus, listen to me. My mother pleaded, trying to salvage the unsalvageable. We can fix this. I did not know about the apartment. I swear to you, I did not know about the other man. I just knew she was in debt. I just wanted to protect her. She is my daughter. We can go to counseling. We can get through this as a family. Julian stepped firmly between Patricia and Marcus, cutting off my mother's frantic manipulation. You do not get to speak about family, Julian said to Patricia, his voice cracking like a whip. You walked into a bank and deliberately stole $42,500 from your youngest daughter. You drained Maya's entire future to protect a woman who was actively destroying her own marriage. You do not care about family. You only care about protecting your own image, and you are willing to sacrifice Maya to do it. Patricia's mouth snapped shut. She glared at Julian with pure venom, but she did not dare argue. Julian had completely cornered her. He had exposed every single lie, every hidden transaction, and every ugly truth they had tried to bury. He had done it methodically, brutally, and with absolute precision. I looked at Marcus. He was carefully gathering the documents Julian had provided. He folded them neatly and placed them back into the thick manila envelope. He picked up the tablet and handed it back to Julian. His movements were slow, deliberate, the actions of a man who had just watched his entire world burn to ash and was now calmly walking out of the wreckage. Thank you, Marcus said to Julian. His voice was steady now. Thank you for showing me the truth. I know it could not have been easy to dig all this up, but I appreciate that you did not let me walk onto a plane to the Maldives like a complete fool. Julian nodded respectfully. You deserve to know the truth, Marcus. No one deserves to be tied to this kind of financial and emotional fraud. Marcus turned to look at Ashley one last time. She was curled up in the dining chair, sobbing into her hands, the picture of a broken, exposed manipulator. She looked up at him, her mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes pleading for a mercy she did not deserve. Marcus did not give her any. He did not offer a single word of comfort. He simply looked at her, his face a mask of absolute resolve. The golden child had finally been stripped of her gold, and underneath there was absolutely nothing left but rot. The tension in the room was electric, crackling with the weight of the devastation Julian had just unleashed. The first layer of their fake reality had been completely destroyed, but the battle was far from over. I watched Marcus carefully tuck the manila envelope under his arm. He looked like a completely different man than the one who had welcomed us into the house just 20 minutes ago. The exhaustion was still there, but the confusion was gone, replaced by a sharp, terrifying clarity. He knew everything now. He knew about the private loans, the secret apartment, the other man, and the stolen wedding fund that had financed all of it. Julian stood by my side, his posture relaxed, but incredibly alert. He had successfully delivered the hardest blow, exposing Ashley's real debts and her infidelity in one swift, undeniable motion. He had taken the narrative completely out of Patricia's controlling hands. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother completely silenced. Patricia stood near the head of the table. Stood near the head of her face, a pale mask of shock and horror. She had stolen my money to save Ashley's marriage, completely unaware that Ashley's marriage was already a rotting corpse. The air in the dining room felt thin, practically vibrating with the aftermath of Julian's forensic audit. I looked at the diamond bracelet on Ashley's wrist, the ultimate symbol of her narcissism and my mother's enablement. They had destroyed my dream wedding for a cheap thrill and a shadow life. But Julian had ensured that their victory was short-lived. The truth was out. The paper trail was undeniable, and the consequences were about to be monumental. Marcus adjusted his coat. He did not look back at the table. He simply turned around and prepared to walk out of that house forever. Marcus stood frozen at the edge of my mother's mahogany dining table. The thick manila envelope Julian had tossed down felt like a ticking bomb in his hands. Even though he had already heard Julian explain the lease agreement and the private loans he needed to see the physical proof for himself. He needed to witness the full scope of the betrayal. With agonizing slowness, he pulled the remaining stack of documents from the envelope. The heavy silence in the room was only broken by the crisp sound of paper sliding against paper. Ashley was still sobbing in her chair, burying her face in her hands, completely unable to meet her husband's eyes. Patricia stood paralyzed, her jaw tight, watching the empire of lies she had built for her golden child crumble into dust. Marcus spread the documents across the table. Julian had been incredibly thorough. There were high-resolution photographs printed on glossy paper. Photos of Ashley walking out of the downtown luxury apartment building holding hands with David. Photos of them sitting together at expensive restaurants. But the financial documents were what truly devastated Marcus. I watched his eyes track across highlighted bank statements, credit card bills, and the private loan shark contracts. Every single page was an undeniable testament to Ashley's absolute fraud. This was an incredibly successful African-American architect who had poured his entire soul into building his firm from the ground up. Marcus had spent years taking on grueling contracts, working late nights, and sacrificing his own peace just to provide a beautiful, comfortable life for the woman he loved. He had trusted Ashley unconditionally. He had given her access to his accounts, his heart, and his future. And looking at the papers scattered across my mother's dining table, he finally understood that his entire marriage was nothing but a transactional lie. She had never been his partner. She had been a parasite secretly bleeding him dry to fund a completely separate life with another man. Marcus let out a deep, shuddering breath. He dropped the last bank statement onto the table. The anger radiating from him was palpable, but it was not loud or explosive. It was a cold, terrifying fury that seemed to lower the temperature in the entire room. He reached over to the back of the dining chair and slowly picked up his tailored charcoal wool coat. He slid his arms into the sleeves with methodical precision, adjusting his cuffs. Every single movement was deliberate. He was physically and emotionally preparing to walk out of her life forever. Ashley looked up, her face streaked with expensive mascara. Her diamond tennis bracelet clinked against the wood as she reached her hands out toward him in a desperate, pathetic gesture. "Marcus, please do not go," she begged, her voice trembling with manufactured panic. "We can fix this. I will go to counseling. I will do whatever you want. Please do not walk out on me. I love you." Marcus looked down at her, and the expression of absolute disgust on his face made me shiver. "You do not know the meaning of the word love," Marcus said, his deep voice echoing in the silent dining room. "You looked me in the eye and swore you were committed to our marriage. You let me work myself to the bone so you could live in luxury, and you used the money your mother stole from your own sister to pay off the loan shark who was funding your affair. You are a complete fraud, Ashley. Every single thing about you is a lie." Patricia rushed forward, trying to insert herself between Marcus and the hallway. "Marcus, wait," my mother pleaded, her voice rising in a frantic, hysterical pitch. "You are in shock. You are not thinking clearly. This is a family matter. We can handle this privately. You cannot just throw away your marriage over a mistake. She's your wife." Marcus stopped and stared at Patricia. The sheer contempt in his dark eyes actually made my mother take a physical step backward. "Do not ever speak to me again, Patricia," Marcus warned, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You stole your youngest daughter's wedding fund to protect a serial cheater. You lied to my face. You handed me a stolen bank check and told me it was a family inheritance to save our marriage. You are just as corrupt and fraudulent as she is. You two deserve exactly what you're about to get." He turned his attention back to Ashley, who was now weeping loudly, her face buried in her arms. "Listen to me very carefully, Ashley," Marcus said, his tone absolute and unwavering. "I am leaving this house right now. I am driving directly to my office. First thing tomorrow morning, I am contacting my legal team. I am freezing every single joint account we have. You will not have access to another dime of my money. I am pulling my name off your luxury vehicle. And I am formally filing for a fault-based divorce first thing on Monday morning." Ashley let out a loud, piercing wail, but Marcus did not even flinch. He did not care about her tears anymore. The illusion was completely shattered. "You can take your diamond bracelet and your secret apartment and your other man," Marcus continued, his voice echoing with devastating finality, "because you are going to need them when the private loan shark comes looking for the rest of his money. I am done. We are entirely finished." Marcus turned away from the golden child and the mother who had enabled her toxic behavior for 30 years. He walked over to where Julian and I were standing near the arched doorway. The anger in his eyes softened the moment he looked at us, replaced by a profound, heavy sorrow. He was a good man who had been completely blindsided, but he was also a man who recognized the truth when it was handed to him. He reached out and extended his hand to Julian. Julian shook it firmly, a silent exchange of respect between two men who valued integrity over manipulation. "Thank you, Julian," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know pulling all this documentation together was not easy, but you saved my life today. You saved me from spending the rest of my life chained to a lie. I owe you a massive debt of gratitude." Then Marcus looked at me. His eyes were filled with deep sympathy and understanding. He knew exactly what my mother had done to me. He knew she had sacrificed my future without a second thought just to keep Ashley on her fake pedestal. "I am so incredibly sorry, Maya," Marcus said softly. "I had absolutely no idea where that money came from. I would have never accepted it if I knew she stole it from your wedding fund. You did not deserve this betrayal. You deserved a family who actually protected you." I nodded, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. "Thank you, Marcus," I whispered. "You did not deserve this either." Marcus offered a tight, sad smile. He adjusted his coat one last time. He did not look back at the dining table. He did not look back at the woman weeping into her hands or the mother frantically trying to salvage her shattered reputation. He simply turned around and walked down the hallway. The heavy oak front door opened and closed with a solid, echoing thud. The African-American architect who had given Ashley the world walked out, taking his money, his status, and his brilliant future with him. Ashley was left sitting at the mahogany table with nothing but her forged bank statements, a cheap diamond bracelet, and the terrifying reality of an impending, ruthless divorce. Julian and I stood in the doorway, watching the immediate aftermath of the destruction. The first monumental conflict had been entirely resolved. Ashley's fake life was officially over, but the battle for my stolen wedding fund and the revenge my mother was about to unleash was only just beginning. Marcus was barely out the front door before my mother rounded on me. The heavy thud of the oak door closing behind him was like a starting gun. Patricia's face was no longer pale with shock. It was flushed with a dark, terrifying red. She marched back into the dining room, her heels striking the floorboards like hammer blows. Ashley was still collapsed in the dining chair, sobbing loudly into her arms, clutching the diamond bracelet against her chest, as if holding onto it could somehow keep her fake life from imploding. I stood my ground next to Julian. My heart was pounding, but the intense, paralyzing fear I had felt in the bank parking lot was completely gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. I had spent 28 years believing I was the problem. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a mother's love that was never actually available to me. I had finally stopped trying, and watching Patricia gear up for an attack only proved how right I was to stop. "Look what you have done!" my mother shrieked, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "Look at your sister. You have ruined her life. You have completely ruined her marriage." I did not flinch. "I did not ruin anything, Patricia." I said, my voice steady. "Ashley ruined her own marriage when she decided to cheat on her husband and fund an apartment with a loan shark. You ruined her marriage when you decided to steal my wedding fund to cover her tracks. Do not try to blame me for your crimes." My mother slammed her hand down on the mahogany table right next to the bank printout showing her forged signature. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat," she yelled, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You have always been jealous of Ashley. You have always tried to tear her down because she is everything you are not. She is beautiful. She is successful. She married well. And what are you? You are just a bean counter. You sit in a boring office, staring at spreadsheets all day. You could never understand the pressure Ashley is under to maintain her lifestyle." Julian shifted slightly, stepping forward, but I put my hand on his arm to stop him. I did not need him to defend me against this. This was my fight. If maintaining her lifestyle means stealing $42,500 from my bank account, then she is not successful. I replied, my tone icy. "She is a fraud, Patricia, and you are a thief." "How dare you call me a thief in my own house?" Patricia screamed, her eyes wide with narcissistic fury. "That money was practically sitting idle. You were just going to waste it on a ridiculous party to show off for people who do not even care about you. Ashley needed it to survive. She needed it to keep her family together. As a mother, I made a command decision to prioritize the child who actually needed me. You are fine. You have always been fine. You just want to play the victim because you cannot stand seeing your sister happy. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. The absolute absurdity of her logic was staggering. She truly believed that stealing my entire future was not only justifiable, but noble. She was not keeping her family together, I said, pointing at the tablet still sitting on the table. She was using that money to pay rent on a secondary apartment where she was cheating on Marcus. Did you not watch the video, Patricia? Your golden child is a serial adulterer. My mother waved her hand dismissively, totally refusing to acknowledge the visual proof Julian had just provided. That video proves nothing, she snapped. It was probably taken out of context. You probably hired someone to fake it just to destroy her. I know how devious you can be, Maya. You have always been a sneaky, manipulative child. I shook my head, astounded by the depths of her delusion. I did not fake anything, and I am not leaving here until you return the money you stole from me. Patricia threw her head back and let out a loud, mocking laugh. It was a cruel, sharp sound that scraped against my nerves. Return the money, she scoffed. Do you honestly think I have $42,000 just sitting in a checking account right now? Do you think I'm going to write you a check today? The money is gone, Maya. I wired it to Ashley. She paid off her debts. She paid her rent. She bought a few nice things to keep up appearances. The money is spent. You are never seeing a single dime of it again. Julian finally spoke, his voice completely devoid of the anger my mother was projecting. It was cool, professional, and terrifyingly calm. If you do not return the funds within 48 hours, we will be filing a police report for grand theft and wire fraud, Julian stated. We will also be filing a civil suit against both of you for the full amount plus damages and legal fees. We have the wire transfer records. We have the bank logs. The evidence is absolutely irrefutable. You will lose Patricia, and you will likely face criminal charges. My mother's eyes narrowed. She looked at Julian with pure, unadulterated hatred. She hated that he was not intimidated by her. She hated that he was completely immune to her manipulation. And she hated that he was right. She knew deep down that a forensic accountant with hard evidence would absolutely decimate her in a courtroom. But Patricia Myers was not a woman who backed down when cornered. She was a woman who went for the throat. You think you are so smart? Patricia sneered, her voice dropping into a menacing hiss. You think you hold all the cards because you have a few bank statements? You think you can come into my home, ruin my eldest daughter's life, and then threaten me with a lawsuit? She took a slow, deliberate step toward me. Her face was twisted into a cruel, triumphant smile. You forgot one very important detail, Maya. My mother said, her tone dripping with malicious satisfaction. You forgot who owns the roof over your head. My stomach gave a tiny, involuntary lurch. I knew exactly what she was talking about. 3 years ago, when Julian and I decided to get serious about saving for our wedding, we wanted to cut our living expenses drastically. Rent in the city was astronomical. At the time, my mother offered a seemingly generous solution. My late grandfather had owned a small 2-bedroom condo in a decent neighborhood just outside the city limits when he passed away. The condo was placed into a family trust. Patricia was the sole trustee. She had offered to let Julian and me live in the condo. We would not pay traditional market rent. Instead, we would just pay the mortgage, the property taxes, and the HOA fees directly to the trust. It cut our housing costs in half, allowing us to save aggressively for the wedding. We had been living there ever since, diligently making our monthly payments to the trust account my mother controlled. You live in my condo, Patricia announced, crossing her arms again. The property belongs to the family trust, and I am the trustee. I have absolute authority over that asset. And considering the massive financial damage you have just caused this family by driving Marcus away, I am going to have to make some difficult financial decisions. Ashley looked up from her hands, her tear-streaked face suddenly turning hopeful. She realized what our mother was doing. Patricia was going to use my home as a weapon. Since Marcus is threatening to freeze Ashley's accounts and file for a fault-based divorce, Patricia continued, her voice ringing with vindictive glee. Ashley is going to be completely cut off from her marital assets. She's going to need money to hire a ruthless divorce attorney. She's going to need a substantial settlement just to survive the lifestyle drop you forced upon her. I stared at her, the horrific realization washing over me. You are threatening my home. I am not threatening anything. My mother smiled a cold, shark-like expression. I am giving you verbal notice. As the trustee of the property you are currently occupying, I am officially issuing a 30-day notice to vacate. You and your arrogant accountant fiancé have exactly 1 month to pack your things and get out. Julian's posture immediately stiffened, but he remained silent, letting Patricia dig her grave deeper. I am selling the condo, Patricia declared, her voice loud and triumphant. The housing market is booming right now. That property is worth at least $400,000. I'm going to liquidate the asset, and I'm going to use the proceeds to hire the best divorce attorneys in the state to ensure Ashley gets exactly what she deserves from Marcus. Any money left over will go directly into a private account for Ashley to help her rebuild the life you just destroyed. You cannot do that, I said, my voice rising in disbelief. I have paid the mortgage on that property for 3 years. Julian and I have paid the property taxes. We have paid the HOA fees. We have maintained that condo perfectly. You cannot just kick us out and sell it to pay for Ashley's divorce. I absolutely can, Patricia snapped, stepping right up to my face. The deed is in the name of the trust. My name is the only name that matters on those documents. You are nothing but a month-to-month tenant, Maya. You have absolutely no legal rights to that property. She turned to Ashley, who was actually smiling now, wiping the smeared mascara from her cheeks. Do not worry, sweetie, Patricia cooed, her voice instantly softening. Mom is going to fix this. We are going to sell the condo, get you a brutal shark of a lawyer, and make sure Marcus pays you for the emotional distress he's causing. We are going to make sure you are completely taken care of. Ashley nodded, shooting me a smug, superior look. See, Maya? Ashley said, her voice dripping with spite. Mom always fixes things. You should have just kept your mouth shut. Now you do not have a wedding fund, and you do not have an apartment. I hope your stupid little stunt was worth it. I stood in the dining room, looking at the 2 women who shared my blood. They were completely devoid of empathy. They had stolen my savings, and now they were actively plotting to make me homeless, all to ensure the golden child never had to face a single consequence for her own horrific actions. Patricia was perfectly willing to throw me out onto the street to sell the roof over my head, just to finance a divorce battle that Ashley had entirely brought upon herself through infidelity and fraud. You have 30 days, Patricia reiterated, her voice hard and uncompromising. I suggest you spend less time threatening me with police reports and more time looking for a cheap apartment you can actually afford on your miserable salary. If you are not out by the 30th, I will have the sheriff forcibly remove you and throw your belongings onto the curb. I felt a cold, terrifying calmness settle over my entire body. I did not cry. I did not scream. The time for tears was completely over. Julian reached out and placed his hand firmly on the small of my back. He did not say a word to Patricia. He did not need to. He simply looked at my mother with a slow, calculating expression like a predator studying its prey before a strike. Are we done here? Julian asked me, his voice a low, steady rumble. I looked at Patricia's triumphant, arrogant face. I looked at Ashley's smug, tear-stained smile. I realized in that exact moment that I had absolutely nothing left to lose, which meant I was finally free to fight back with everything I had. Yes, I said, my voice completely steady. We are done here. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back. I did not slam the front door. I walked down the brick pathway with Julian right beside me. We got into his car and he locked the doors. The silence inside the vehicle was heavy, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of 2 people shifting from defense to pure, unadulterated offense. My mother thought she held all the cards. She thought the threat of eviction would force me into submission. She thought I would shrink, apologize, and walk away to lick my wounds. But she had fundamentally misunderstood the situation. She thought she was dealing with the frightened 13-year-old girl she had always manipulated. She did not realize she was dealing with a 28-year-old corporate finance manager who was about to unleash a senior forensic accountant on her entire fraudulent life. Patricia had just threatened to use a family trust as a weapon, and Julian absolutely loved dismantling family trusts. The drive back to our condo was the quietest car ride of my entire life. The adrenaline that had carried me through my mother's dining room was completely gone, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in my chest. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar suburban streets blur into a gray streak. My mother had not just stolen my wedding fund. She had looked me dead in the eye and threatened to take the roof over my head. She was going to sell my home to pay for a ruthless divorce attorney for my cheating sister. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of it physically suffocated me. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, trying to hold myself together. That condo was not just a piece of real estate to me. It was the first place Julian and I had ever lived together. We had painted the walls a soft sage green. We had spent countless weekends scouring flea markets for the perfect mid-century coffee table. We had cooked our first Thanksgiving dinner in that tiny kitchen, setting off the smoke detector 3 times. We had sacrificed so much luxury just to diligently pay the mortgage and the property taxes directly to the family trust, completely believing my mother when she said she was helping us build our future. Now I realized she was just using us to pay off an asset she intended to liquidate the second her golden child needed a bailout. We pulled into our designated parking spot. I did not move to unbuckle my seatbelt. I just sat there staring at the brick exterior of the building. The tears I had refused to shed in front of Patricia and Ashley finally broke loose. I pressed my hands over my face, sobbing so hard my shoulders shook. I felt Julian unbuckle his seatbelt and slide across the center console. He wrapped his large, warm arms around me, pulling me tightly against his chest. He rested his chin on the top of my head, just letting me cry, letting the sheer terror of impending homelessness wash over me. I told him I was so sorry. I told him I had ruined everything by confronting her. I told him we were going to lose our home and we had absolutely no money left for a deposit on a new apartment because my mother had drained our savings. I told him maybe we should just pack our bags and walk away before she sent the sheriff to throw our lives onto the curb. Julian gently pulled back, framing my tear-streaked face with his hands. His dark eyes were completely calm and anchored with a terrifying absolute confidence. He used his thumbs to wipe the tears from my cheeks. "Maya, listen to me," Julian said, his voice a low, steady rumble in the quiet car. "We are not packing our bags. We are not running away. We are not letting that woman take one more thing from you. Do you understand me?" I sniffled, looking up at him. "But she is the trustee." I whispered, my voice cracking. "She controls the family trust. She has the legal right to evict us and sell the condo. She said her name is the only one on the deed." Julian let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was the sound of a predator who had just watched his prey walk directly into a trap. "Maya, I am a senior forensic accountant," Julian said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "I spend 50 to 60 hours a week tearing apart fraudulent shell companies, offshore accounts, and complex corporate embezzlement schemes. Do you have any idea how much I absolutely love it when arrogant, narcissistic people threaten to open up family trusts?" I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. I did not understand what he meant. "People like your mother think a trust is a magic shield," Julian explained, his voice dropping into a razor-sharp professional tone. "They think being a trustee makes them an untouchable dictator. They think they can use the trust assets as their own personal piggy bank to reward the people they favor and punish the people they hate. But a family trust is a highly regulated legal entity. A trustee has a strict fiduciary duty to manage the assets according to the exact letter of the trust document and the law. They cannot simply liquidate an asset to fund a personal vendetta or pay for a divorce lawyer for a beneficiary who is not explicitly entitled to those specific funds. And Patricia just gave me the perfect excuse to legally compel a full comprehensive audit of every single thing she has done since your grandfather died." Julian opened his car door. He walked around to my side, opened my door, and offered me his hand. "Let us go inside, Maya. We have a lot of work to do." The profound despair that had been crushing my chest instantly vanished, replaced by a burning, brilliant spark of hope. I took his hand and let him lead me into our home. The very next morning, our dining room table was completely transformed into a financial war room. Julian did not go into his corporate office. He cashed in 2 weeks of accumulated vacation time, setting his out-of-office auto-reply and turning his phone on silent. He brewed a massive pot of strong black coffee and brought his high-powered dual-monitor work laptop out to the table. I sat right across from him, fueled by pure righteous anger and a desperate need to protect my home. My mother thought she could use her status as trustee to terrify me into submission, but she had completely forgotten that I worked in finance too. I understood spreadsheets. I understood tax codes. I understood how to follow a paper trail. We started with the property deeds. Julian logged into the county clerk database, paying the municipal fees to pull every single publicly filed document associated with the condo since the day my grandfather purchased it 30 years ago. He pulled the original deed, the transfer of ownership into the family trust, and the municipal tax assessment records. We spent hours cross-referencing the dates, the signatures, and the exact legal terminology used by the county. Patricia had always claimed she was doing us a massive favor by letting us live here. She claimed she was taking a financial loss to help us save for our wedding. But as Julian pulled the property tax filings, the truth began to look very different. Julian highlighted a column of numbers on his monitor and turned the screen toward me. "Look at this, Maya," he said, tapping the screen with his pen. "Patricia told you that you were just paying the base mortgage and the property taxes directly to the trust to cover the carrying costs. But look at the actual county tax records. The property taxes on this condo are exactly $3,200 a year. That breaks down to roughly $266 a month. But your mother has been charging you $450 a month, specifically categorized as tax escrow." My eyes widened as I looked at the numbers. "Where is the extra money going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That is exactly what we are going to find out." Julian replied, his eyes locked on the data. He pulled up the Homeowners Association public filings. He compared the monthly dues listed by the HOA board against the exact amounts my mother had been invoicing me for 3 years. Another discrepancy. She was overcharging us by nearly $200 a month on maintenance fees that did not actually exist. Month after month, year after year, my mother had been artificially inflating the carrying costs of the condo, deliberately skimming hundreds of dollars off the top of my monthly payments. She was not helping me save for my wedding. She was using me as a passive income stream, quietly padding her own pockets while playing the generous matriarch. The sheer level of manipulation was staggering, but Julian was not finished. He told me that finding the skimmed money was just the appetizer. The main course was the trust document itself. In order to legally evict us and sell the property, Patricia had to act within the specific parameters established by my late grandfather when he created the trust. Julian needed to see the exact language my grandfather had used, because I was a named beneficiary of the family trust. Julian walked me through the process of legally requesting a full copy of the trust declaration from the estate attorney who had drafted it. Since Patricia had verbally threatened to alter my living situation and liquidate a trust asset, I had immediate legal grounds to demand the paperwork. We received the heavily encrypted digital file from the estate attorney 3 days later. It was a massive 90-page legal document filled with dense, complex estate law terminology. To a normal person, it would have been an unreadable wall of text, but to a senior forensic accountant, it was a roadmap. Julian printed the entire document. He bought a pack of yellow highlighters and a stack of red sticky notes. We sat at the dining table under the bright overhead lights, reading every single line, every single clause, and every single stipulation my grandfather had carefully laid out before he passed away. My grandfather had been a meticulous, hardworking man who deeply valued fairness. He had always noticed how Patricia favored Ashley. I remembered him pulling me aside at family gatherings, giving me warm smiles, and telling me how proud he was of my independence. I had always assumed he left everything to my mother because she was his only child. But as Julian's yellow highlighter dragged across page 42, the reality of my grandfather's final wishes hit me like a lightning bolt. Julian stopped highlighting. He slowly put the cap back on his marker. He looked up at me, the silence in the room stretching out for a long, agonizing moment. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. The kind of smile that meant he had just found the exact thread that would unravel Patricia's entire existence. "Maya," Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, reverent whisper, "you need to read section 4, paragraph B." I pulled the thick stack of paper across the table. I traced my finger down the page, my heart pounding heavily against my ribs. I read the legal jargon, carefully translating it in my head. My grandfather had indeed placed the condo into the family trust. He had indeed named my mother as the primary trustee, but he had not given her absolute unchecked authority. My grandfather had inserted a very specific, highly restrictive conditional clause regarding the sale or liquidation of any real estate property held within the trust. The clause stated that no residential property held by the trust could be sold, liquidated, or borrowed against without the unanimous written consent of all adult beneficiaries of the trust. I stared at the black ink on the white paper, reading the sentence 3 times to make absolutely sure I was not hallucinating. I looked up at Julian, my hands trembling. I am an adult beneficiary, I whispered, the realization crashing over me. I am explicitly named in this document. Julian nodded, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Yes, you are Maya. Your mother is the trustee, but she does not have the power of a dictator. Your grandfather knew exactly what kind of woman his daughter was. He knew she would try to funnel every single asset to Ashley if given the chance, so he legally blocked her. He explicitly mandated that she cannot sell this condo without your legal authorized signature. Patricia cannot just issue a 30-day eviction notice and put this place on the market to fund Ashley's divorce. If she tries to list this property without your consent, she is committing a massive breach of fiduciary duty. The relief was so profound, it physically took my breath away. She could not sell my home. She could not throw us onto the street to pay for Ashley's mistakes. My grandfather had reached out from the grave to protect me. But Julian was not smiling out of mere relief. He was smiling because he was a professional auditor, and he knew the golden rule of fraudulent trustees. If a trustee is willing to brazenly lie about their authority to sell a massive real estate asset, they are absolutely lying about something else. Patricia just played her hand entirely wrong, Julian said, tapping his fingers against the table. She was so blinded by her narcissistic rage and her desperate need to protect Ashley that she thought she could just bully you out of your home. She threatened to liquidate a trust asset to directly benefit a single beneficiary while actively harming another. That is the exact definition of fiduciary malpractice, and it gives us the legal right to force a comprehensive independent audit of every single bank account, every single investment, and every single transfer Patricia has executed as trustee for the last 10 years. Julian leaned forward, his dark eyes burning with absolute unwavering determination. We are not just going to stop her from selling this condo, Maya. We are going to rip open the entire family trust. We are going to follow every single penny she has touched since your grandfather died. We are going to find out exactly how she has been secretly funding Ashley's lifestyle for the past decade. And then we are going to burn her empire to the ground. The dining room table was completely covered in a sea of highlighted papers and empty coffee mugs. We had been staring at the 90-page trust document for hours, and my eyes were beginning to blur. My grandfather had amassed a decent amount of assets during his lifetime, and he had documented every single one of them with meticulous, terrifying detail. Julian was sitting across from me, tracing his pen down page after page of dense legal jargon. I watched the muscle in his jaw flex as he processed the information. He was completely in his element. While I was practically suffocating under the emotional weight of my mother threatening to make me homeless, Julian was treating this entire situation like a massive jigsaw puzzle that he was actively dismantling. I took a slow sip of cold coffee, trying to settle the relentless pounding in my chest. Patricia had been so absolutely certain of her power. She had stood in her dining room and told me she was going to sell my home to fund the divorce of my cheating sister. She had weaponized the very walls I lived within. I looked down at the documents, feeling a surge of profound gratitude for the man sitting across from me. He was not just my fiancé. He was my absolute shield. My grandfather had been a brilliant, hardworking man who built a successful logistics company from absolutely nothing. He was sharp, and he possessed an uncanny ability to read people. I always knew he saw right through my mother's superficial country club facade. He knew she prioritized appearances over actual substance, and he definitely knew how heavily she favored my older sister, Ashley. When he passed away, he placed his assets into a family trust to ensure they were managed responsibly. I had always blindly trusted my mother when she told me she was the absolute ruler of this trust. I had handed over my monthly housing payments without a single question, believing I was honoring my grandfather's wishes. But as Julian flipped to page 45 of the trust declaration, his pen suddenly stopped moving. The scratching sound against the paper ceased entirely. Julian leaned forward, bringing his face closer to the bright screen of his laptop and then back to the physical document in his hands. The silence in our condo stretched out thick and heavy. I watched his dark eyes scan the same paragraph 3 times in a row. He did not say a word. He just sat there breathing slowly, and then a slow, predatory smile began to form on his lips. It was the exact same smile he wore when he caught a corporate executive attempting to hide embezzled funds in offshore shell companies. He placed his pen down on the mahogany table with a soft, precise click. "Maya, I need you to read this," Julian said, his voice dropping into a low, resonant register that sent a shiver straight down my spine. He turned the heavy legal document around and pushed it across the table toward me. "I want you to read Section 6, Paragraph C out loud." I pulled the stack of paper closer, my hands trembling slightly. I cleared my throat and focused on the dense black text. I read the words, carefully navigating the complex legal terminology. The clause stated that the residential property located at our exact address was indeed held within the family trust for my direct benefit. But there was a condition attached to it, a massive, legally binding condition that my mother had completely hidden from me. The text stated that upon the 28th birthday of the beneficiary, Maya, the aforementioned residential property, shall be fully and irrevocably transferred from the trust into the sole and exclusive ownership of the beneficiary. I stopped reading. My lungs felt like they had completely seized up. I read the sentence again and then a third time. The words did not change. The legal mandate was absolute. Upon my 28th birthday, the property shall be fully and irrevocably transferred into my sole ownership. I looked up at Julian, my mind racing a million miles an hour, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just read out loud. "Julian," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I turned 28 exactly 2 months and 4 days ago." Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. His smile widened into something genuinely terrifying. "Exactly, Maya," he said, his voice ringing with absolute triumph. "The very second the clock struck midnight on your 28th birthday, the family trust automatically dissolved its hold on this specific asset. The legal mechanism was triggered instantly. This condo does not belong to the trust anymore. It belongs entirely, legally, and exclusively to you. Your grandfather intentionally structured it this way to ensure you would have an asset in your own name, completely free and clear of your mother's control the moment you reached full adulthood." The realization hit me like a physical shockwave. My mother had stood in her pristine dining room just yesterday and viciously threatened to evict me. She had screamed that she was the trustee and she was going to sell my home to pay for Ashley's high-powered divorce attorney. She had tried to terrorize me into absolute submission using a weapon she did not even own. She has absolutely no authority over this property. I said, my voice growing stronger as the truth washed over me. "She cannot evict us. She cannot sell it. She is not the landlord, Julian. I am the owner." "That is exactly right," Julian confirmed, his eyes flashing with brilliant intensity. "Patricia issued a verbal 30-day eviction notice on a property she has zero legal right to manage. She has absolutely no standing. If she tries to send a realtor here, or if she tries to call the sheriff, they will laugh directly in her face the second we present the title transfer mandate from this trust document. Your grandfather completely outsmarted her from the grave." But then the second wave of realization crashed into me, colder and far more sinister than the first. If the property automatically transferred to my sole ownership 2 months ago, that meant my mother was no longer authorized to collect any housing payments from me. I pulled my laptop toward me and frantically logged into my banking portal. I pulled up the transaction history for the last 60 days. "Julian," I gasped, staring at the screen in absolute horror. "I sent her the mortgage and tax escrow payments for last month, and I sent her the payment for this month just 5 days ago. She cashed both checks. She accepted over $3,000 from me for a property I already own outright." Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The triumphant smile vanished from his face, instantly replaced by the cold, calculating demeanor of a senior financial investigator. "She did not just accept the money, Maya," Julian said, his voice deadly serious. "She actively invoiced you for it. She sent you a text message on the first of both months reminding you to transfer the funds to the trust account. She knowingly and deliberately collected rent on a property she no longer controlled. That is not just a simple clerical error. That is premeditated theft by deception. Your mother is acting as a fraudulent landlord, extorting money from you under the false pretense of a trust she knows has already released the asset." My stomach churned with a sickening mixture of rage and profound disgust. Patricia had known. She had to have known. As the trustee, she would have received the automated legal notices from the estate attorney regarding the age milestone trigger. She had purposely hidden the title transfer from me. so she could continue draining my bank account every single month while dangling the threat of homelessness over my head to keep me compliant. But Julian was not finished. He stood up and began pacing the length of our living room, his mind connecting the massive web of financial crimes my mother had just committed. "This changes the entire scope of what we are dealing with," Julian said, turning back to face me. "This is no longer just a family dispute over a stolen wedding fund. Patricia has crossed a massive legal threshold. Let us look at the complete picture. First, she committed theft by deception by illegally collecting your mortgage payments for the past 2 months. Second, she committed a massive breach of fiduciary duty by concealing the legal transfer of a trust asset from the primary beneficiary. And third, we have the issue of the $42,500 she stole from your joint savings account on Monday morning." I watched Julian pace, my heart pounding a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I was no longer the frightened daughter crying in a bank parking lot. I was a homeowner, an independent woman, and I was armed with undeniable proof of my mother's corruption. Patricia told Marcus that she used the wedding money to pay off joint credit card debt. Julian continued, his voice sharp and precise. "But we already pulled the public records and the shadow account details. We know she wired that money directly to Ashley's secret checking account. We know Ashley immediately used those funds to pay off a private predatory loan shark, to pay the lease on an apartment she used to carry out illicit affairs, and to purchase a luxury diamond bracelet." Julian stopped pacing and placed both hands on the table, leaning down until he was right at my eye level. "Maya, when Patricia walked into that suburban bank branch and initiated a wire transfer, she crossed state lines using a federally regulated electronic banking system to move misappropriated funds." Julian explained, his words dropping like heavy stones in the quiet room. "She did not just take cash out of a drawer. She utilized a wire transfer to funnel stolen money into a shadow account designed to conceal illicit debts from a legal spouse. She completely misrepresented the purpose of this withdrawal, and she executed the entire transaction under false pretenses." I stared at him, the gravity of his words sinking deep into my bones. "Are you saying she committed wire fraud?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I am saying she committed federal wire fraud," Julian stated, absolutely unequivocally. "I am saying she is a fraudulent trustee who is actively extorting her own daughter. I am saying that Patricia Myers thought she was playing a simple game of family manipulation, but she actually just handed us the keys to her absolute destruction." Julian walked back to his laptop and began aggressively typing, pulling up new legal forms, and drafting massive comprehensive financial summaries. "We are not just going to send her a strongly worded letter from a lawyer, Maya. We are going to compile every single forged invoice, every single wire transfer log, every single predatory loan contract, and this exact trust document. We are going to build a completely airtight forensic audit that exposes every single criminal action she has taken to fund Ashley's fake life." He looked up at me, his dark eyes burning with a fierce protective fire. "She wanted to threaten your home," Julian said softly but firmly. "She wanted to throw you out on the street to protect a cheater. So we are going to take everything she values. We are going to freeze the family trust. We are going to compel a full legal transfer of the deed into your name tomorrow morning. And then we are going to present Patricia with a choice. She can return every single penny she stole from you, including the illegal rent payments, or we will take this entire forensic portfolio directly to the federal authorities and let them explain the mandatory sentencing guidelines for wire fraud to her in a criminal courtroom." I looked at the 90-page trust document sitting on the table. I looked at the highlighted clause that guaranteed my ownership of the condo. My grandfather had seen the truth long before I ever could. He knew my mother would eventually try to strip me of everything I had just to maintain the illusion of Ashley's perfection. He had planted a legal time bomb in the family trust, specifically designed to protect me when I finally turned 28. I reached across the table and grabbed a red sticky note. I placed it directly next to Section 6, Paragraph C, marking the exact spot where my mother's absolute power over my life had officially died. I was not going to be evicted. I was not going to lose my home. I was going to secure my title, and then I was going to make Patricia pay for every single ounce of pain she had caused me. "Let us build the audit," I told Julian, my voice ringing with a cold, unshakable certainty. "I want every single transaction documented. I want her to see exactly what happens when she tries to destroy my future." Julian smiled a brilliant, dangerous smile that promised absolute ruin for anyone who dared to stand in our way. We spent the rest of the night tearing through the remaining files, preparing the ultimate legal trap for a mother who had finally pushed her scapegoat daughter entirely too far. News travels incredibly fast in elite suburban circles. It took exactly 4 days for the rumors of Marcus freezing his assets to breach the pristine walls of my mother's country club. You cannot keep a fault-based divorce quiet when the husband is a highly prominent architect and the wife's platinum credit cards are suddenly declining at high-end boutiques. Patricia knew her carefully curated image was on the verge of total collapse. For 30 years, my mother had built her entire identity around being the flawless matriarch of a perfect, affluent family. Ashley was her masterpiece. The idea that her country club friends might find out her golden child was actually a broke adulterer who financed a secret life with predatory loans was a fate worse than death to her. So Patricia did what narcissists always do when they are backed into a corner. She went on the offensive. She decided to completely rewrite reality before the absolute truth could catch up to her. Her weapon of choice was the annual Women in Business charity luncheon. It was the most exclusive, highly anticipated event of the spring season, held in the grand ballroom of the Oak Creek Country Club. Patricia was the chairwoman of the organizing committee. This club was her absolute domain. It was where she derived all her power and social standing. She knew that if she could control the narrative in that specific room, she could control the gossip in the entire town. I found out about her plan through a former high school friend who still worked in the administrative office at the club. She called me in a panic to tell me Patricia was personally calling every influential woman on the guest list, weeping into the phone about a terrible family tragedy. My mother was telling everyone that Marcus was having a severe midlife crisis and making up horrible, vicious lies to justify leaving my poor, innocent sister. But her calculated smear campaign did not stop with Marcus. She needed a scapegoat to explain why the family was suddenly in financial turmoil. She needed a villain to blame for the sudden loss of my wedding fund, which people had already started asking about since the caterer cancelled our contract. And of course, she chose me. Patricia was actively telling her wealthy friends that I had suffered a massive psychological breakdown. She claimed I had become violently jealous of Ashley's beautiful marriage and was trying to extort the family for money. She was painting herself as the grieving, victimized mother who had sacrificed everything for an ungrateful daughter who was now abandoning the family in their darkest hour. When I told Julian what she was doing, I expected him to be furiously angry. I expected him to want to call her and demand she stop spreading lies about my mental health. Instead, he just poured himself a cup of black coffee and opened his work laptop. He did not yell. He did not curse. He simply looked at me with that same terrifyingly calm expression he wore when we dismantled the family trust documents. "Let her talk," Julian said, his voice smooth and incredibly calculated. "Let her gather every single person she wants to impress into one room. Let her build her beautiful glass house of lies right in front of the entire community. Let her stake her entire social reputation on a story she cannot possibly back up with facts. It just makes it that much more devastating when we finally shatter it." I asked him how we were going to stop her if we were not even invited. Patricia had explicitly banned me from the club grounds years ago, claiming my modest wardrobe and quiet demeanor were an embarrassment to her social standing. I was certainly not on the exclusive guest list for the charity luncheon. Julian smiled a brilliant, dangerous smile as his fingers flew across his keyboard. "You do not need a personal invitation when your fiancé is a senior partner at one of the top forensic accounting firms in the state," Julian replied. "The Oak Creek Country Club relies heavily on corporate sponsorships to fund their lavish charity galas. My firm just happens to have a massive philanthropic budget for local business events. We are not going to sneak in through the back door, Maya. We are going to walk straight through the front doors as platinum-level VIP sponsors." Julian wired a massive corporate donation to the charity foundation, securing us a private table right near the front of the grand ballroom. He did it under his firm's name, completely bypassing Patricia's watchful eye on the guest list. She had absolutely no idea we were coming. The day of the luncheon arrived with bright, mocking sunshine. I wore a tailored emerald green dress that Julian had bought for me. It was elegant, structured, and it made me feel like I was wearing armor. As we drove up the winding, tree-lined driveway of the Oak Creek Country Club, My stomach fluttered with a complex mixture of deep anxiety and intense anticipation. I had spent my entire life shrinking away from these opulent spaces, feeling like an imposter among my mother's wealthy, judgmental friends. I was conditioned to believe I did not belong here. But today, I was not walking in as Patricia's disappointing youngest daughter. I was walking in as the legal owner of my own home, an independent corporate finance manager, and the bearer of absolute undeniable truth. We stepped into the grand foyer. The air was thick with the overwhelming scent of expensive floral arrangements and designer perfumes. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of champagne through the milling crowd of women in pastel suits and silk dresses. It was a sea of manufactured perfection. Every smile was carefully calculated. Every compliment was a social transaction. This was my mother's world. This was the superficial illusion she had stolen my $42,500 wedding fund to protect. The sheer contrast between the luxury of this room and the reality of her financial crimes made my blood boil. Julian placed his warm hand on the small of my back, guiding me smoothly through the crowded room. We kept our heads down, moving purposefully toward our reserved corporate table near the back of the ballroom before the main presentation began. We did not want Patricia to see us until the trap was perfectly set. We wanted her to feel completely secure in her power before we took it all away. We took our seats just as the massive crystal chandeliers dimmed and a soft spotlight illuminated the center stage. The room buzzed with polite, appreciative applause as my mother stepped up to the microphone. Patricia looked absolutely immaculate. She wore a tailored ivory suit that radiated quiet generational wealth. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her expression was carefully composed into a mask of dignified sorrow. She looked exactly like a woman bravely holding her family together through an unspeakable tragedy. "Thank you all for being here," Patricia began, her voice echoing softly through the high-end sound system. She sounded so incredibly sincere that for a fraction of a second, I almost doubted my own sanity. "I want to speak to you today, not just as the chairwoman of this wonderful charity, but as a mother. We are here today to support women in crisis, but sometimes the greatest crises happen right inside our own homes, behind closed doors where nobody else can see." A collective, sympathetic murmur rippled through the audience. Women leaned forward, clutching their champagne glasses, completely captivated by Patricia's masterful performance. "Many of you know my beautiful daughter, Ashley." Patricia continued, placing a hand elegantly over her heart. "She has been going through an incredibly dark time recently. Her husband has unfortunately lost his way. He has made some terrible choices and is trying to dismantle their beautiful marriage with baseless, cruel accusations. It has been devastating to watch my eldest daughter suffer so deeply when she has done absolutely nothing wrong." I dug my fingernails into my palms. She was actually doing it. She was standing in front of 200 people and painting Marcus, the man whose heart and bank account Ashley had absolutely shredded, as the villain. She was using a charity event to run a public relations campaign for a serial cheater who funded her illicit affairs with a loan shark. "But that is not the hardest part," Patricia said, her voice breaking perfectly right on cue. "The hardest part is watching how this tragedy has destroyed the rest of my family. My youngest daughter, Maya, has always struggled. She has always battled with terrible, deep-seated jealousy regarding her sister. And in this moment of crisis, instead of standing by her family, Maya has chosen to attack us." Several women in the crowd gasped softly, exchanging shocked, whispered comments. Julian reached over and took my hand under the table. His grip was warm and grounding, anchoring me to reality, while my mother stood on stage and spun her toxic fiction. "Maya has completely turned her back on us," Patricia told the room, wiping a single artificial tear from her cheek with a lace handkerchief. "She has made up horrible paranoid delusions about our finances. She's trying to extort money from me, making wild, ridiculous claims about stolen funds just to kick her sister while she is down. I have tried everything to help her. I gave her a roof over her head. I paid for her life. But some people simply cannot be saved. It breaks a mother's heart to say this, but I have had to completely cut ties with my own child to protect the family that remains." The sheer audacity of her lies was breathtaking. She had walked into a bank and stolen my money. She had actively hidden the title to my own home. She had threatened to throw me onto the street. And now she was standing under a spotlight, soaking up the pity of 200 wealthy women, claiming I was the abuser and she was the tragic martyr. She was ensuring that if I ever tried to tell the truth, no one in this entire town would ever believe me because they had already been primed to view me as a hysterical, extorting liar. She finished her speech to a round of warm, supportive applause. Women were dabbing their eyes with linen napkins, completely entirely fooled by her brilliant narcissistic performance. Patricia stepped down from the stage, surrounded immediately by a flock of well-wishers, offering their profound sympathies and condemning my terrible, ungrateful behavior. She was glowing with the validation she so desperately craved. I looked at Julian. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was completely clear. She had laid out her entire narrative. She had publicly committed to her lies in front of her most important peers. She had built her glass house right in the center of the grand ballroom, and she had firmly locked the doors. Julian looked back at me, his dark eyes shining with a cold, beautiful ruthlessness. He slowly unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black leather folder. It contained the printed trust documents, the highlighted property deeds, and the certified bank wire transfer logs proving every single instance of Patricia's federal wire fraud and fiduciary malpractice. He had everything we needed to destroy her. "Are you ready, Maya?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper against the murmuring crowd. I looked at Patricia holding court near the front of the room, accepting hugs and validating nods from women she had just blatantly lied to. I thought about the $42,500 she stole from me. I thought about the 30-day eviction notice she had screamed in my face. I thought about the 28 years of being treated like an invisible burden while she worshipped a fraud. I realized I was no longer afraid of this room or the women in it. I stood up from the table, smoothing the skirt of my emerald dress. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and hard. "Let us go introduce ourselves." The Oak Creek Country Club was a fortress of old money and carefully guarded secrets. I walked through the massive double mahogany doors with my head held high, my emerald green dress moving like liquid armor around my legs. Julian walked right beside me, his hand resting warmly on the small of my back, a constant and grounding presence. For 28 years, this building had been my mother's absolute domain. It was the place where she wielded her social influence like a weapon, the place where I was never deemed polished enough or wealthy enough to belong. But today, the thick floral scent of the grand foyer did not make me nauseous or anxious. It just smelled like a house of cards waiting to be pushed over. We stood near the back of the grand ballroom for a few moments, letting the sheer scale of my mother's vanity sink in. There were easily 100 of the most influential women in the city gathered here, all sipping top-shelf mimosas and bidding on expensive silent auction items. They were the exact women my mother had spent the entire morning lying to, painting me as a hysterical, jealous monster who was actively abandoning her family in their darkest hour. It took exactly 4 minutes for Patricia to spot us. She was standing near a towering swan ice sculpture holding court with the wives of 2 local politicians and the president of the Historical Society. I watched her perfectly manicured smile completely freeze on her face. Her eyes widened, her posture stiffened, and the blood literally drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and terrified beneath her expensive foundation. She quickly excused herself, abandoning her captive audience, and marched toward us with the frantic, aggressive energy of a woman whose absolute worst nightmare had just materialized in her sanctuary. "Maya," Patricia hissed, her voice a toxic, strained whisper as she closed the final few feet between us. "What on earth are you doing here? You are not on the guest list. You need to turn around and leave this building right now before I call security and have you publicly humiliated in front of my friends." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no intimidation, just a cold, clinical pity for a woman whose entire existence depended on a lie. "I am not leaving, Patricia," I said, my voice completely level and calm. Julian stepped forward smoothly, interposing his tall, broad frame between my mother and me. "Actually, Patricia," Julian said, his tone dripping with polite corporate finality. "As the platinum-level VIP sponsors of this afternoon's charity luncheon, my firm was guaranteed a front-row table and full unrestricted access to the venue. If you call security, you will be forcibly removing the very people who paid for the open bar and the floral arrangements you are currently taking credit for. I highly doubt the country club management will allow you to do that. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. She looked at Julian's tailored suit, then at the heavy black leather folder in his hand. She realized in that agonizingly slow second that she had absolutely no power here. She could not bully us out. She could not scream without drawing attention. She was trapped in the very cage she had built. The sharp chime of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne glass echoed through the ballroom. The event coordinator stepped up to the microphone on the center stage, announcing that the silent auction was officially wrapping up, and it was time for the charity chairwoman to give her final remarks. Patricia looked at the stage, then back at us, sheer panic radiating from her eyes. She took a rapid step toward the podium, clearly intending to rush through her closing speech and get the crowd out of the building as quickly as possible. But I moved faster. I did not run. I did not rush. I walked with the deliberate, terrifying calmness of a woman who held the absolute, undeniable truth. Julian walked right beside me. The crowd parted for us, murmuring in confusion as we bypassed our reserved VIP table and walked directly up the 3 small steps onto the stage. The event coordinator, recognizing Julian as the primary corporate sponsor from his firm's generous donation, smiled brightly and stepped aside, willingly handing me the microphone. I stood at the podium, looking out over 100 perfectly styled, incredibly wealthy women. The room went dead silent. These women knew exactly who I was. They had just spent the last hour listening to my mother weave a tragic fictional tale about my supposed psychological breakdown. They stared at me, expecting to see a hysterical, deranged daughter acting out in a fit of jealousy. Instead, they saw a completely composed, financially independent professional holding a microphone. I looked directly down at my mother, who was now standing completely frozen at the base of the stage, her face a mask of absolute, unadulterated terror. "Good afternoon, ladies," I said, my voice projecting clearly and smoothly through the ballroom speakers. "I know many of you are very close friends with my mother, Patricia Myers, and I know that this morning she has shared a deeply personal, tragic story with you regarding my sister Ashley's impending divorce and my own supposed mental instability." A collective, uncomfortable hush fell over the room. Women shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between me on the stage and Patricia standing paralyzed on the carpet. "I am here today because I believe in the core mission of this charity, which is empowering women to face difficult truths." I continued my tone, never rising, never wavering. "So I am going to share the actual truth with you today. My sister's husband, Marcus, an incredibly hardworking and brilliant architect, is indeed freezing his assets and filing for a fault-based divorce. But he is not doing it because of a midlife crisis. He is doing it because he discovered that Ashley has been renting a secret luxury apartment downtown to conduct a long-term affair, and she has been funding that shadow lifestyle using predatory, high-interest private loans." The collective gasp that erupted from the audience was absolutely deafening. Women covered their mouths, staring at Patricia in sheer shock. Patricia lunged forward, her hands grasping the edge of the stage, her knuckles turning white. "Maya, stop it right now," she shrieked, entirely abandoning her carefully crafted country club etiquette. "Turn off that microphone." But I did not stop, and to prevent Marcus from discovering this massive financial fraud, I said, my voice slicing right through my mother's hysterical screaming. "Patricia walked into a bank on Monday morning and forged my signature. She drained $42,500 from my personal savings account. She stole my entire wedding fund, ladies. She wired it to a shadow account so Ashley could pay off a loan shark and buy a diamond tennis bracelet to wear to Sunday dinner." Julian stepped forward and placed the heavy black leather folder directly onto the podium in front of me. I opened it. I pulled out the certified bank records, the wire transfer logs, and the photographic evidence of the secret apartment. I held them up for the entire room to see. The murmurs in the crowd turned into loud, furious whispers. But my mother did not just stop at grand theft, I told the horrified crowd, keeping my eyes locked on Patricia. When my fiancé and I confronted her with these bank records, she did not apologize. Instead, she verbally threatened to evict me from my home. She told me she was going to illegally sell the condo I live in, a property held in a family trust, so she could hire a ruthless divorce attorney to protect her cheating daughter. I looked down at Patricia. Her knees actually buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of a nearby cocktail table to keep from collapsing onto the floor. I reached into the folder and pulled out the final stack of documents. These were the trust papers, highlighted and annotated by Julian. I stepped down from the podium. I walked directly up to my mother. The entire ballroom was so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the silver champagne buckets. I held the papers out. Patricia's hands were shaking so violently she could barely take them. "These are the trust documents, Patricia." I said, my voice low but carrying perfectly in the absolute silence of the room. "You forgot that the trust mandated the immediate transfer of the condo title to my sole ownership on my 28th birthday, which was 2 months ago. You have been illegally collecting my mortgage payments on a property you no longer control. You are a fraudulent trustee, and you have committed federal wire fraud." My mother stared at the legal papers in her hands, her eyes wide, her mouth working but producing absolutely no sound. The empire of lies she had spent 30 years building was completely and entirely destroyed in less than 5 minutes. The women in the room, her country club peers, the people whose opinions she valued more than her own children, were looking at her with sheer, unfiltered disgust. They were whispering to each other, their faces filled with absolute revulsion. She had lost everything. She had lost her social standing, her pristine reputation, and her complete control over my life. I did not yell, I did not curse. I simply looked at the broken, fraudulent woman standing in front of me, turned my back on her, and walked away with Julian right beside me. We walked back through the heavy mahogany doors, leaving the suffocating air of the country club behind us, forever stepping out into the bright, clear sunlight of our entirely new lives. I stood there on the center stage, letting the heavy silence of the grand ballroom wrap around me like a comforting blanket. Patricia looked down at the thick stack of legal paper I had just forced into her manicured, trembling hands. Her eyes were wide and panicked, darting frantically across the bold black text of the top page. I wanted to make absolutely sure that every single woman in that country club understood exactly what was happening. I wanted to leave absolutely no room for my mother to spin another toxic, fabricated story once Julian and I walked out the mahogany doors. I wanted her complete destruction to be entirely public and entirely undeniable. "Read the first page, Patricia." I said, my voice echoing through the microphone, clear and unwavering. "That is a formal civil lawsuit filed in the county court this very morning. It demands the immediate and full restitution of the $42,500 you stole from my personal bank account. We have attached the wire transfer logs, the forged signature documents, and the routing numbers proving you moved those funds to conceal your golden child's illicit debts. But the legal action does not stop there. The second document you are holding is a formal legal demand for the return of every single dollar you illegally collected from me under the guise of rent and property taxes. You extorted thousands of dollars from your own daughter for a property you did not even own, and you did it while smiling straight to my face." I paused for a moment, letting the absolute reality of her financial crimes sink deep into the minds of her wealthy peers. The women who had just been dabbing their eyes with linen napkins, offering my mother their profound sympathies, were now staring at Patricia with absolute unadulterated revulsion. The illusion of the flawless sacrificing matriarch was completely dead, replaced by the ugly, undeniable truth of a desperate, fraudulent thief. They were looking at a woman who would steal from her own child to fund a lie. And the document underneath that lawsuit, I continued pointing down at the heavy folder in her hands, is the certified property deed to the condo. You will see that it is registered solely and exclusively in my name. The family trust automatically dissolved its hold on that property the exact second I turned 28 years old. You knew that, Patricia. You received the legal notices from the estate attorney. You actively chose to hide the title transfer from me, so you could continue draining my bank account and threatening me with eviction. You weaponized my own home against me to protect Ashley, but you have absolutely no power left. You cannot evict me. You cannot sell my home. You own absolutely nothing. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but she could not formulate a single word. She simply stared at the deed proving my ownership. The ultimate tool of her manipulation had been completely neutralized, but my actions were only half of the reckoning they faced that week. Marcus did exactly what he promised he would do. The African-American architect, who had built a beautiful, luxurious life for my sister, did not hesitate. He did not waver. He did not entertain a single one of Ashley's frantic, tearful phone calls begging for forgiveness. The very next morning, Marcus sat down with one of the most ruthless and respected family law attorneys in the city. He presented them with the thick manila envelope Julian had prepared during his 48-hour forensic deep dive. He showed his legal team the undeniable evidence of the secret luxury apartment, the security photographs of the other man, the predatory private loan contracts, and the irrefutable proof that Ashley had funded her illicit lifestyle using stolen money and marital assets under entirely false pretenses. Marcus's legal team moved with breathtaking speed and absolute precision. By Monday morning, they had successfully filed an emergency petition with the court to freeze every single joint bank account, every shared investment portfolio, and every shared credit line. Ashley woke up on Monday to find that her platinum cards were completely useless. The endless flowing river of Marcus's hard-earned money had been violently and permanently shut off. She could not buy a coffee, let alone maintain her fake influencer aesthetic. Then came the official divorce filing. Marcus did not file for a quiet, amicable separation. He filed for a fault-based divorce, citing severe financial infidelity and gross marital misconduct. The forensic evidence Julian had unearthed was so incredibly overwhelming and so meticulously documented that Ashley's own defense attorney reportedly told her she had absolutely no chance of winning in front of a judge. The entire foundation of her marriage was revealed to be a financial and emotional fraud. The legal fallout was absolute and spectacular because of the fault-based filing and the extensive, indisputable documentation of her financial crimes. The family court judge ruled heavily in Marcus's favor. Ashley was awarded absolutely zero alimony. She was not entitled to any ongoing spousal support from the man she had so callously betrayed and manipulated. Furthermore, the court strictly ruled that the massive high-interest debt she had accumulated with the private loan shark was hers and hers alone. Marcus was entirely absolved of any financial responsibility for the shadow life she had built behind his back. Ashley lost everything she valued. She was legally forced to vacate the beautiful, sprawling downtown loft Marcus had purchased for them. She was forced to surrender the keys to the luxury SUV that my mother had always been so incredibly proud of. Her entire fake lifestyle, built entirely on lies, stolen wedding funds, and another man's hard work collapsed like a fragile house of cards in a hurricane. The designer clothes, the expensive tropical vacations, the elite country club brunches, they all vanished literally overnight. She was left with absolutely nothing but mountains of crushing high-interest debt and a shattered personal reputation that made her a complete pariah in their affluent social circles. With zero income, no successful husband to bankroll her extravagant spending, and a ruthless private loan shark demanding immediate repayment, Ashley had only one desperate option left: the golden child, the sister who had spent her entire life looking down on me, the woman who had smirked in my face while wearing a diamond bracelet bought with my stolen wedding money, had to pack her remaining belongings into cheap black garbage bags. In an ironic twist of absolute poetic justice, Ashley was forced to move back into Patricia's house. But because my father had finally reached his absolute breaking point with the endless financial chaos and the public humiliation they had brought upon the family, he demanded some semblance of a boundary. Ashley was not given her old comfortable childhood bedroom. She was not welcomed back as the conquering hero. She was forced to move her bags into the dark, unfinished basement. Patricia, completely humiliated and socially ostracized by the country club society she so desperately worshipped, was now permanently trapped in a house with the very daughter she had ruined her own life to protect. There were no more lavish charity luncheons. There were no more smug bragging sessions about Ashley's perfect, wealthy marriage. There was only the suffocating, bitter reality of their shared failures. Patricia had sacrificed her relationship with her youngest daughter, she had committed federal wire fraud, and she had completely destroyed her own social standing, all to ensure that Ashley never faced consequences for her toxic behavior. And Patricia's ultimate reward was a broke, bitter, divorced daughter living in her basement, drowning in predatory debt, and constantly blaming Patricia for not fixing the unfixable mess she had created. They were finally forced to look at each other every single day, stripped of their stolen money and their elaborate lies, realizing that they were exactly the same kind of toxic, empty people. They were locked in a prison of their own making, and there was no one left to steal from to bail them out. Standing on that stage, looking down at Patricia's shaking hands, As she held the documents of her own legal and social destruction, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. I did not need to yell, I did not need to scream or cry or beg for her to love me. The truth was loud enough on its own. I turned away from the microphone, leaving Patricia to face the 100 silent, judging eyes of her former friends. Julian offered me his arm, and we walked down the center aisle of the grand ballroom together. We walked out of the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of the country club and into the bright, clear afternoon air. We left them behind in the burning wreckage of their own making. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the punching bag. I was finally and entirely free. As Julian and I walked out of the grand ballroom, I did not look back, but I could feel the absolute destruction we left behind. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind us, cutting off the thick, suffocating air of the country club. Inside that room, the silence had finally broken. It was replaced by the vicious buzzing of 100 wealthy women who had just witnessed the complete dismantling of Patricia Myers. These were women who measured a person's entire worth by their reputation and their financial integrity. Patricia had spent 30 years cultivating their approval, kissing up to the board members, hosting their extravagant luncheons, and pretending she was the absolute pinnacle of suburban perfection. Now they knew the truth. They knew she was a thief. They knew she stole from her own daughter to finance the illicit affairs of her golden child. Gossip in those elite circles spreads faster than a wildfire, and it is infinitely more destructive. I heard from a former friend who stayed at the luncheon that the moment I walked out, women literally physically turned their backs on my mother. When Patricia frantically tried to spin another pathetic lie to justify the legal documents in her hands, no one even gave her the courtesy of listening. The charity committee president quietly approached her and suggested she resign her position immediately to avoid bringing any further embarrassment to the organization. Patricia was completely, entirely ostracized in a matter of minutes. Her social standing evaporated into thin air, leaving her completely isolated in a room full of people she used to rule. But the social humiliation was only the absolute beginning of her nightmare. The legal trap Julian had set was flawless and inescapable. When we initiated the civil lawsuit to recover the $42,500 and the stolen rent payments, Julian did not stop there. He is a senior forensic accountant, and his comprehensive audit of the family trust was a masterpiece of financial documentation. He uncovered years of deliberate commingling of funds, unreported gifts to Ashley, and blatant violations of fiduciary duty. Julian systematically compiled every single piece of evidence and legally submitted the findings directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the State Tax Authority. A fraudulent trustee who actively conceals asset transfers and misreports trust income is not just dealing with a bitter family dispute. They are dealing with federal tax evasion. Exactly 3 days after the country club luncheon, Patricia received official formal notice that she was the subject of an active federal tax investigation. The sheer panic she must have felt receiving that certified letter is something I can barely even imagine. She had always believed she was untouchable, simply because she was a mother dealing with family money. She never genuinely respected the law because she believed her own entitlement placed her completely above it. Now the federal government was demanding a full accounting of every single penny she had touched for the past decade. The reality of her situation came crashing down with absolute terrifying weight. Patricia was facing severe civil penalties, mandatory restitution to me, and the very real, undeniable threat of federal prison time for wire fraud and tax evasion. Her defense attorneys looked at Julian's immaculate forensic audit and reportedly told her she had absolutely zero chance of fighting this in any courtroom. They gave her one single path to avoid a criminal trial. She had to immediately repay every single dollar she stole from my joint bank account and fully refund the thousands of dollars in illegal rent she had extorted from me over the past 3 years. She also had to pay massive legal fees and impending tax fines to the government. But Patricia did not have that kind of liquid cash sitting in a bank account. She had spent her entire adult life keeping up appearances, buying expensive clothes, hosting lavish parties, and constantly bailing Ashley out of her superficial debts. Her bank accounts were effectively empty. She had absolutely no other choice left. To stay out of federal prison and satisfy the crushing financial demands closing in from every single direction, Patricia had to liquidate her only remaining asset. She had to list her pristine, beautiful suburban home for sale. The supreme irony of it all was simply breathtaking. Just a few days prior, Patricia had stood in her dining room and viciously threatened to sell the roof over my head. She had wanted to make me homeless to protect her golden child. Now, because of her own blinding arrogance and criminal greed, I was safely living in a condo I legally owned outright, and Patricia was the one being forced out of her home. She had to swallow her massive toxic pride and put a for sale sign on her manicured front lawn for the entire neighborhood to see. Because she needed the money so urgently to satisfy the court mandates and avoid prison, she could not even wait for a good offer. She had to accept a terrible lowball price from a cash buyer. The house she had used to project wealth and superiority was sold at an embarrassing loss just to pay for her extensive crimes. And she was not facing this absolute ruin alone. Ashley, the beautiful, perfect golden child, was now permanently residing in her basement, completely broke, deeply in debt, and utterly useless. Marcus had successfully secured a fault-based divorce, leaving Ashley with no alimony and zero access to his wealth. The massive high-interest loans she took out to fund her secret apartment were entirely hers to repay, so the two of them were left entirely to each other. A fraudulent mother and an adulterous daughter, stripped of their money, their status, and their beautiful homes. They spent their days screaming at each other, constantly trading blame for their completely mutual, inevitable downfall. I just finally felt the quiet, powerful peace of absolute and total, undeniable poetic justice being served. 6 months later, the autumn air was crisp and completely perfect. I stood in the bridal suite of a stunning historic botanical garden, looking at my reflection in a full-length antique mirror. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, but someone I deeply loved. She was not the frightened 28-year-old girl who used to shrink away from her mother's harsh words. She was not the desperate daughter trying to buy love that was never actually for sale. She was a woman who had fought a massive battle for her own life and absolutely won. My wedding day was exactly the kind of beautiful, peaceful celebration Julian and I had always dreamed of. It was not a pretentious, showy country club gala designed to impress shallow socialites. It was an intimate gathering of the people who actually loved and supported us. And the best part was the fact that the entire beautiful event was paid for using the exact funds my mother had tried to steal. The court-ordered restitution forced Patricia to return every single penny of my $42,500 wedding fund, plus significant legal interest, and the complete reimbursement of the thousands of dollars in fraudulent rent she had extorted from me. Every single flower, every string quartet melody, and every slice of our beautiful tiered cake was financed by the money I had legally clawed back from her greedy hands. I walked down the aisle toward Julian, feeling lighter than air. There was no Patricia sitting in the front row judging my dress. There was no Ashley trying to steal the spotlight or complaining about the catering. Their absence was not a tragedy. It was the most profound, beautiful peace I had ever experienced in my entire life. Marcus was there, sitting proudly in the third row. He looked like a completely new man. The heavy, exhausting burden of financing Ashley's toxic secret life was entirely gone. He smiled brightly as I walked past, and later at the reception, we shared a quiet, meaningful toast. He raised his glass of champagne and told me how incredibly proud he was of me for standing up to them. I raised my glass right back and told him he looked truly free for the first time since I met him. We both were. We had both been used and manipulated by the exact same toxic family, and we had both found the absolute strength to cut the dead weight and walk away. Julian took my hand and led me to the center of the dance floor for our first dance. As he spun me around under the warm golden string lights, I rested my head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. He had been my absolute shield, my fierce protector, and my partner in justice. We had dismantled my mother's fraudulent empire piece by piece and secured the title to our beautiful home. We were safe. I looked around the room at Julian's wonderful parents, who treated me like their own daughter, at our supportive friends, and at the beautiful life we were actively building. For 28 years, I had let my mother convince me that I was the problem. I had let her label me the difficult, ungrateful child while she worshipped a cheating fraud. I had spent my entire life setting myself on fire, just to keep Patricia and Ashley warm, and they had only complained about the smoke. But not anymore. I finally understood that I was never the scapegoat. I was simply the only person in that family who possessed a genuine moral compass. I was the victor. I had reclaimed my stolen money, I had secured my home, and I had permanently banished their toxic shadows from my life. I finally had the space to breathe and to simply exist without constantly bracing for the next emotional attack. Looking out at the smiling faces of the guests, I realized that true family is entirely about mutual respect and genuine care. It is never about blind loyalty to people who continuously abuse your trust. Looking back at everything that happened, I want to leave you with one vital psychological takeaway. Boundaries are not betrayal. When you grow up in a toxic environment, you are conditioned to believe that saying no is an act of violence against your family. You are taught that you must sacrifice your own happiness, your own savings, and your own sanity to protect their fragile illusions. But let me tell you something I learned the absolute hard way. When toxic family members demand that you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm, you do not have to strike the match. You can hand them the match and walk away. You do not owe your life to people who only view you as a resource to be exploited. You owe yourself the beautiful piece of cutting them off. Have you ever had to legally or financially protect yourself from your own family? Have you ever had to draw a massive line in the sand to save your own future? If you know exactly what I am talking about, and you believe that justice always comes around, type the word karma in the comments below. Let me know I am not the only one who had to fight this battle. Please do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. And before you go, drop a comment telling me exactly what city you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I absolutely love seeing where this community reaches. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. Remember, your worth is not defined by the people who failed to love you. See you in the next story.